a lavish ball, glittering lights, champagne flowing like water. And Chicago's most dangerous man stands motionless in the crowd, all because of a woman who emerges from the shadows. She's not a movie star, not a beauty queen. She's his secretary, someone he's never actually met. But tonight, Chicago's entire underworld empire will shake because of her, because she carries a secret that many have died to bury. If you're watching this story, please hit like and comment the name of the city you're watching in so I know how far my story has progressed. And don't go anywhere, doll, because everything is about to fall apart. The call came at 7:14 on a Thursday evening, and Ethan Moretti was in the middle of making a man deeply regret certain financial decisions when his phone lit up with a number he did not ignore under any circumstances. He stepped away from the back room of the restaurant, a private dining room on the 43rd floor of a building whose address did not appear on any business registry, and answered on the second ring. He didn't speak. He waited. "You will attend the gala Saturday," his grandmother said. Her voice was 81 years of hard living compressed into something that sounded less like speech and more like a verdict. "And you will not come alone. I have a prior engagement." "Your prior engagement is a meeting about cement contracts." A pause that lasted exactly long enough to feel like a wound. "Cancel it." Ethan stood at the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. Chicago spread out below him like a circuit board, all lit lines and dark spaces, and somewhere in those dark spaces were about 47 individuals who, at this particular moment, owed him either money or silence. He pressed 2 fingers to his temple and said nothing. "Nonna, 3 years," she said. 3 years I have watched you treat this family like a holding company. Saturday you will arrive at 8. You will bring a woman, a presentable woman, and you will smile at least 4 times where I can see it." She hung up. Ethan looked at his phone for a moment. Then he walked back into the private room, finished the conversation about the cement contracts in 11 minutes flat, and rode the elevator down to the building's lobby where his car was waiting. His driver, Marco, did not speak. Neither did Ethan. They pulled out into the Thursday night traffic and drove toward the Moretti Group's headquarters, a 40-story tower of black glass on Michigan Avenue that cast no reflection after dark, which Ethan had always found appropriate. He walked through the lobby, rode the executive elevator to the 38th floor, and pushed open the door to his office. The city was visible through 3 walls of glass. His desk was already cleared and restaged from whatever he'd left it in at noon. The 2 files he needed on top, the backup drive on the left, the phone charger plugged in and ready. His coffee was there too, in the exact ceramic cup he used, at the temperature he drank it. He noticed none of this consciously. He hadn't noticed it for 3 years. He sat down, opened the first file, and worked for 40 minutes before he stopped. He looked up. Across the open floor of the executive suite, past the glass partition, a single desk lamp was still on. A woman sat beneath it with her back slightly curved over a keyboard, moving through something with the unhurried focus of a person who had already given up on leaving at a reasonable hour and made peace with it. Amelia Carter, his executive secretary. He registered her in the same category as the coffee cup, something that functioned correctly and therefore required no additional consideration. He watched her for a moment. Then he pressed the intercom. "Carter?" She looked up immediately, not startled. She never startled. "Yes." "Saturday. The Nonna event. Gala. Whatever it's called. The Moretti Foundation Annual Charity Gala. The Hendricks Estate, 8 o'clock, black tie." She said it the way she said everything, direct, already knowing why he was asking before the question was fully formed. "I have your confirmed attendance on file. You declined to bring a guest when the RSVP was sent." "I need a guest." A beat. Not hesitation, more like a brief recalibration. "I can contact Ms. Farrow, Ms. DeLuca, or arrange—" "You," he said. Another beat, longer this time. "I'm your secretary. I'm aware of your position. Saturday, 8 o'clock. Arrange your own transportation to the estate." He looked back down at his file. "You'll be reimbursed for any necessary clothing. Check the vendor account. There's a card on file for exactly this kind of expense." He waved his hand vaguely. "Dress like you're supposed to be there." He did not look up again. After a moment, he heard her chair shift, the lamp click off, and the elevator doors open and close. He didn't think about it again until Saturday. He thought about it for approximately 4 seconds on Saturday, standing at the entrance of the Hendricks estate, where a line of black cars was depositing guests in formal wear onto white stone steps lit by columns of warm light. He was thinking about whether he'd forgotten to send confirmation on the warehouse acquisition when a car stopped at the base of the steps and the door opened. He didn't register it as her for a moment. The woman who stepped out wore a gown the color of winter moonlight, silver gray, fitted from shoulder to hip and then falling in panels that moved when she walked. Her hair was loose, not styled in the aggressive sense, not architecture and product, just dark and straight and falling past her shoulders in a way that looked almost careless, except that nothing about the rest of her was careless. Her posture was exact. Her chin was level. She wore a single piece of jewelry, a thin platinum band on her right hand, and nothing else that caught light except her eyes. The steps went quiet. Not entirely. There was still music from inside, still the murmur of arriving guests, still the crunch of gravel under car tires. But in the immediate radius around the base of those stairs, something stopped. Conversations paused mid-sentence. A man near Ethan actually lowered his champagne glass. 3 women standing in a cluster to his right turned and looked, and one of them made a very small sound that she quickly covered. Ethan didn't move. Amelia walked up the steps at the same measured pace he'd seen her walk from the elevator to his desk 1,000 times. She stopped beside him, looked at him, and said, "Good evening, you're early." "I'm always early." "I know." She looked at the entrance. "Shall we go in?" He offered his arm because the situation called for it, and not for any other reason he could have named, and she took it with the same brisk neutrality she used to hand him documents, and they walked in together. The Hendricks estate was the kind of place that existed to make you feel the precise weight of how much money was in the room. The ballroom ceiling was 40 feet high and made almost entirely of glass that looked out onto a private lake. The tables were dressed in white and gold. A 14-piece orchestra played from a raised platform at the far end, and somewhere between the third violin and the double bass, the whole room smelled of money, old money, the kind that had calcified into institutions and foundations and annual galas with waiting lists. They were 10 feet into the room before the first person stopped Ethan with a hand on his arm. Moretti, Senator Hal Brannick, 63, a man whose career had been quietly underwritten by the Moretti family for the better part of a decade. He was looking past Ethan with an expression somewhere between impressed and unsettled. "And who is this?" "My guest," Ethan said. Brannick waited. Ethan did not elaborate. Amelia extended her hand and said, "Amelia Carter, it's a pleasure." She said it pleasantly and precisely, the same way she answered phones, and Brannick shook her hand like a man who was slightly uncertain what was happening to him. They moved through the room, and it continued. The pauses in conversation when they passed, the turned heads, the way women who had known Ethan Moretti for years angled toward him with expressions that sharpened when they registered Amelia beside him. He caught it all in peripheral vision, the social physics of the room rearranging around them like iron filings near a magnet. And he registered it as a kind of background data without assigning it particular weight. His grandmother found them at the bar. Caterina Moretti was 5'1", wore black exclusively, and had survived 4 decades of criminal enterprise, 2 assassination attempts, and the deaths of both her sons without ever acquiring the look of a woman who was tired. She was 70 years younger than the estate around her in every way that mattered. She looked at Ethan with the expression of a woman checking something off a list, and then she looked at Amelia. The look she gave Amelia lasted 3 full seconds, which was longer than Caterina Moretti gave most things. "Miss Carter," she said, "Ethan has mentioned you." "Only in administrative contexts, I'm sure," Amelia said. "It's an honor. This is a remarkable foundation. The literacy initiative in the South Side, the results over the last 2 years have been exceptional." Caterina's expression shifted in a way that Ethan had not seen it shift in a long time, something that was not quite warmth but was in the neighborhood of it. "You've read the reports." "I prepare all foundation correspondence for Mr. Moretti's review. I read everything I prepare." She said it without emphasis, without performance, just information. Katerina looked at her grandson with an expression he couldn't fully decode. Then she took Amelia's arm and began walking her toward the far end of the ballroom, and Ethan stood at the bar with his drink and watched his grandmother, a woman who had not voluntarily left his side at a social event since his father's funeral, walk away with his secretary. He ordered a second drink. The trouble arrived in a red dress. Vivian Cole was 31, the daughter of a banking family, with Chicago roots running back 5 generations, and she had been engaged to Ethan Moretti for 6 months in a previous chapter of his life that he did not revisit. The engagement had ended badly, by which the polite version was that they had mutually determined their priorities were incompatible, and the accurate version was that Vivian had been conducting a sustained and fairly creative information extraction operation on behalf of a competing interest, which Ethan had uncovered at significant personal cost on multiple dimensions. She crossed the room toward Amelia with a particular kind of social precision, the kind that was designed to look casual while being entirely deliberate, and Ethan saw it happen from 40 feet away and moved through the crowd without hurrying, because hurrying would have signaled something. He didn't make it in time. "I don't believe we've met," Vivian said, and her smile was a specific instrument. "I'm Vivian Cole, and you're Ethan's—" a pause exactly long enough to imply something. "Secretary." The word landed the way it was intended to land. Around them, 3 or 4 conversations adjusted their orbits slightly. Amelia looked at Vivian Cole with an expression Ethan had never seen on her face at the office. It was not defensive. It was not flustered. It was the expression of someone who had taken an accurate measure of a situation in about 2 seconds and found it significantly less threatening than advertised. "That's right," Amelia said. "And you're Vivian Cole, Whitmore Cole Bank. Your family provided the secondary collateral on the Lakeshore development in 2019, which went into receivership 14 months later. Ethan's team recovered their position. Yours didn't." She tilted her head slightly. "I process a great deal of financial correspondence." Complete silence in their immediate vicinity. Vivian's smile didn't move. Her eyes did. "How thorough of you," she said. "I try to be prepared," Amelia said pleasantly. Vivian left. Ethan reached Amelia's side approximately 11 seconds after this exchange concluded and stood beside her without speaking for a moment. "You didn't need the save," he said finally. "No." She picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. "But thank you for trying." He looked at her. Not at his secretary processing a social difficulty, at the person beside him, who had just taken apart one of the more strategically dangerous women in this room, using nothing but precise information delivered in a pleasant tone. He thought about how often that was exactly what she did. How often he had handed her a problem and she had handed it back solved, and he had accepted the solution without looking at the mechanism. "How long have you worked for me?" he asked. She looked at him. 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. "Do you count them?" "No. I checked my employment file this week when I was updating your personnel records." He nodded. He looked out at the room. Something was sitting in the back of his chest that he didn't have immediate language for. Then the main doors opened and the room moved. Not dramatically, not the whole room, but the section nearest the entrance rippled in a way that Ethan's nervous system, trained over 20 years to read rooms like weather, registered immediately. He turned. The man who walked in was about 40, wide across the shoulders, wearing a tuxedo that hadn't been rented. He had dark skin, close-cut hair going silver at the temples, and a stillness to him that was the same stillness Ethan recognized in himself. Not calm exactly, but compressed, controlled. The stillness of someone who was always managing the distance between what they were thinking and what they allowed to show. Ethan knew who he was. Leon Vega, heir apparent to the Vega Syndicate, a West Coast organization that had been quietly expanding its reach eastward for the past 2 years. They'd had preliminary contact through intermediaries. Nothing had been concluded. He watched Leon Vega move through the room with the practiced ease of someone who had been in rooms like this many times, comfortable with chandeliers and orchestras as a professional tool, neither impressed by them nor contemptuous of them. He accepted a glass of champagne. He exchanged words with 2 men near the bar. And then his eyes moved across the room with the automatic scan of someone who did it habitually, without thinking. And they stopped. Ethan watched it happen, watched Leon Vega's scan reach the spot where Amelia stood 8 feet away, and watched every piece of the controlled composure he'd been wearing walk into a wall. Not surprise. Not attraction. Something older and more complicated than either of those things. Something that looked, from across the ballroom, like a wound being reopened. Vega set his champagne glass down very carefully on a nearby table. He moved through the crowd. He stopped in front of Amelia. Ethan was close enough to hear. "You disappeared," Vega said. His voice was very quiet. 3 years. No word. Nothing. Amelia had gone still. Not the composed stillness from 30 seconds ago. Something different. Something that looked like a person standing very carefully inside a space that had just become dangerous. "Leon," she said, "I looked for you. I know. Did you think—" He stopped himself. His jaw tightened. "We need to talk. This isn't the place." "No." He looked at her with something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, and was somehow worse than both. "It never is, with you." Ethan stepped forward. He positioned himself at Amelia's side. Not in front of her, not aggressively, but close enough that the geometry of the situation communicated itself. Vega looked at him. They looked at each other for a moment in the way that two people who understand power look at each other, assessing, acknowledging, neither giving ground. "Ethan Moretti," Vega said. "Leon Vega." He didn't offer his hand. "I don't believe you were on the guest list." Vega's mouth moved in something that wasn't a smile. "I was invited. Your grandmother and my uncle have history." He looked back at Amelia. "I didn't expect to find what I found." "And what did you find?" Ethan asked. Vega looked at Amelia for a long moment, the kind of look that contained an entire argument that was too old and too complicated to have in a ballroom. Then he looked at Ethan. "Ask her," he said. "Ask her who she really is." He picked up his champagne glass from where he'd set it, nodded once, and walked toward the far side of the room. Ethan stood very still. Then he turned and looked at Amelia. She was looking straight ahead. Her jaw was set. The sparkling water in her hand was very steady. "Carter," he said quietly. "Not here," she said. Her voice was even, professional. The voice she used when she was telling him something that required no further question. But underneath it, underneath all of it, underneath the silver gown and the precise posture and 3 years of flawless invisibility, something had cracked open, and Ethan could see the edge of it, and he understood suddenly that whatever was on the other side of that crack was not small. "Amelia," he said. She turned and looked at him. It was the first time he'd used her first name in 3 years. He was almost certain of that, and from the way something shifted in her eyes, she was certain of it too. "Later," she said. "I'll tell you everything, but not—" The first gunshot came from the east corridor. Not a single shot. A burst, suppressed but not silenced. The specific sound of professional weapons that Ethan's ears had known since before he understood what they meant. For 1 second, the entire ballroom froze, collective animal instinct holding 400 people in suspension. Then the screaming started. Ethan's hand was on Amelia's wrist before the second shot. His other hand was already reaching inside his jacket for the weapon he always carried, in every context, under every kind of evening wear, because there was no version of his life in which he was unarmed. His head was moving, scanning the exits, counting the points of entry, reading the angles of the room the way he'd been reading rooms since he was 15. 3 men in the east corridor, armed, moving inward. 2 more near the service entrance on the south wall. He could tell by the way the catering staff had dropped and scattered in that direction. The orchestra had stopped playing. Tables were turning over. Guests were running toward the main entrance and finding it blocked, which meant this was coordinated, which meant it was not random, which meant— He looked at Amelia. Her face had gone completely white. Not with fear, or not only fear, with a recognition that was almost worse. The look of someone who had spent 3 years trying to outrun something and just heard its footsteps directly behind her. "They're here for you," he said. It wasn't a question. She closed her eyes for 1 second. 1 second of something he couldn't name. Not quite grief, not quite defeat, more like a person who had made a bet against terrible odds and just watched the odds collect. Then she opened her eyes, and they were clear and focused. "There's a service corridor behind the kitchen," she said. "South wall, steel door, keypad. The code is the Foundation's founding year." He stared at her. "How do you know that?" "Because I research this venue the way I research everything before you walk into it." She looked at him. "Do you want to stand here and be impressed by that, or do you want to move?" He moved. They crossed the ballroom at a low run, Ethan's hand on her back, his body angled to put himself between her and the east corridor where the shooting was heaviest. Around them, people were still running. Tables overturned, glass breaking, the orchestra platform empty, and its instruments abandoned. His phone was in his hand, and he had Marco on the line in 3 seconds. "Inside, weapons, 7 at minimum. Hold the perimeter. No one leaves in a vehicle without my voice confirmation. Get Caruso and the second unit to the estate service road in 5 minutes." "Copy." Marco's voice was entirely calm, which was why Marco had been his driver for 8 years. The kitchen was chaos. Staff down behind counters, one man Ethan assessed as a genuine threat in the northwest corner before registering the Hendricks estate staff uniform. And then the steel door exactly where Amelia had said it would be. She keyed the code without hesitating. The door opened onto a stone corridor that smelled of old cement and years, lit by industrial ceiling fixtures stretching away into the dark beneath the mansion. The door closed behind them. For a moment there was nothing but the distant percussion of the gunfight above them, muffled by stone and steel, and the two of them standing in the cold corridor light. Ethan's weapon was out. His breathing was controlled. His mind was moving through variables with the cold efficiency of a machine. He looked at her. "Talk," he said. She looked at him for a moment. In the hard fluorescent light, with the silver gown out of place against gray stone walls and the sounds of violence filtering down from above, the last piece of whatever she'd been holding in place for 3 years seemed to slip. "My name," she said, "is not just Amelia Carter." He waited. "My father was Richard Yoon Carter. He ran a financial syndicate, not American. International. 14 countries, maybe 30 organizational affiliates, the kind of infrastructure that takes 20 years and 100 alliances to build." Her voice was even. She was reporting. That was how she coped. He understood suddenly. She reported, she briefed, she kept information clean and forward-moving because it was the only way to say terrible things without stopping. 6 years ago, his organization was destroyed. Not by law enforcement, by people inside it. A coordinated betrayal. 3 of his most trusted lieutenants working with competing interests. 41 people died in one night. His entire inner circle. His wife. A pause. "My mother." Ethan said nothing. "My father survived, barely. He sent me away before it happened. I think he knew something was coming, even if he didn't know exactly what or when. I was 23. I had documentation he'd prepared for me, new identity materials, financial access to accounts that nobody else knew existed." She looked at the wall. The organizations that destroyed his network didn't get everything they were looking for. There were financial channels, routing systems he'd built over years, access codes only I have, accounts worth more than any of them could spend in 3 lifetimes. He hid it all through me, in me, without ever telling me until the night he put me on a plane. And you've been hiding ever since. "I've been surviving," she said, and for the first time there was something in her voice that wasn't control, something with a rough edge on it. "I took a job with the most dangerous man in Chicago because I thought it was the safest place to hide. Who looks for a missing heiress to a destroyed crime syndicate in the offices of a rival mafia boss?" He looked at her for a long moment. "How many organizations are looking for you?" "Currently?" Her mouth moved. "At least 4 that I've tracked, possibly 6. She met his eyes. "I've been tracking them from your filing system, from your intelligence reports, from everything that crosses your desk that touches international financial crime networks." She paused. "I hope you understand I was never a threat to you. I'm not worried about that right now." "What are you worried about?" Ethan looked up at the ceiling, toward the sounds of the fight still playing out in the estate above them, and thought about the men up there. His men, people who had been with him for years, taking fire because his grandmother had wanted him at a party, and he had grabbed the nearest woman without thinking. He thought about 3 years of a woman sitting under a lamp in his office, doing work that had quietly held pieces of his operation together in ways he hadn't noticed, carrying something that would have crushed most people, and carrying it alone. He thought about Leon Vega's face when he saw her across the ballroom. The look of a wound reopened. He holstered his weapon. He looked at her. She was watching him with an expression that was braced, not for violence, but for something she'd been expecting for 3 years. Some version of this conversation that ended with her being handed over or turned out or used as a commodity because that was what the world around her had always done. "We're going to walk out of here," he said, "and then I'm going to make some calls. And then this stops." "You don't understand what you're—" "I understand exactly what I'm committing to," he said. "I've been in this business since I was 15 years old. I know what it costs to protect someone." He looked at her. "I'm choosing to pay it." She stared at him. In the cold corridor light, something moved across her face that she couldn't entirely contain. Not relief, not yet. Something more fractured than that. The face of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand between them and the thing they were running from. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, genuine. He didn't have a clean answer for that. The honest answer was sitting in his chest like something undigested. 3 years of not looking, 3 years of a lamp on late in an empty office, 3 years of someone making his world run cleanly and asking nothing, and he had never once asked himself why he'd never looked up. "Later," he said, and used her own word back at her. From the far end of the corridor came the sound of a metal door opening, footsteps, more than one person. Ethan's weapon was back in his hand in under a second. He stepped in front of Amelia, both of them against the wall, the corridor stretching ahead and behind them, the footsteps getting closer. And somewhere in the back of his chest that thing that was sitting there got heavier, and he thought clearly and without sentiment. If they want her, they are going through me, and whatever that means, I've already decided. The footsteps stopped. A voice came from the dark at the end of the corridor. A voice Ethan didn't recognize, calm and professional, with an accent he placed as Eastern European. "Ms. Carter, you know what we need. Come with us. The Moretti man can walk away." Silence. Ethan waited. He felt Amelia's hand on his arm. Just her fingers, light, gripping the sleeve of his jacket. Not pulling him back, just contact, just proof that she was there. "Tell them," he said quietly, not turning his head. "Tell them what I said." A pause. Then her voice, steady as anything he'd ever heard from her. "He said they'll have to kill him first." The man at the end of the corridor was giving them 10 seconds. Ethan could feel it. Not a countdown spoken aloud, but the specific quality of silence that a professional uses when he's already decided what happens at 0. The kind of silence that has weight to it, like air before a storm front moves in and the barometric pressure drops and every animal in a field goes still. Ethan didn't move. His back was against the stone wall, Amelia 2 feet behind him, and he had the corridor geometry memorized in the 6 seconds since he'd entered it. 40 feet of straight passage, one branch left at 20 feet that he hadn't confirmed, industrial lighting with 2 dead bulbs creating patches of shadow at the 12-foot and 30-foot marks. The voice had come from the 30-foot shadow. He'd clocked 1 set of footsteps, but professionals rarely came in single file. He kept his breathing even by force of will. In through the nose, out-controlled, the way Marco had taught him on a cold morning in a parking garage when Ethan was 16 and learning things no school had curriculum for. "Last call," the voice said, still calm. The accent more distinct now. Slovak, maybe Czech, the consonants had that particular flatness. "Ms. Carter walks with us. You walk out. No one needs to count bodies tonight." "Already counting," Ethan said. "I've got you at the 30-foot mark, and 1 more at the branch left of center. 2 of you in a closed corridor against 1 of me. You've run that math, right?" A pause, just long enough to confirm the count was accurate. "You're outnumbered upstairs," the voice said. "Your men are contained." "My men," Ethan said, "are never contained. They're occasionally delayed." Behind him, he felt Amelia shift, not retreating, just repositioning, and when he glanced back, she had moved against the opposite wall and was watching the far end of the corridor with a focus that was entirely without panic. He filed that away. Panic would have been easier to manage. The absence of it meant she'd been here before. In spaces like this, with the sounds of violence above and no clear exit, and someone at the end of a dark passage offering a deal that wasn't a deal. That was its own kind of information. 30 seconds, the voice said. The calm was starting to have something underneath it now, not anger, impatience, which meant a timeline, which meant someone above them with a clock running. Ethan moved, not toward the voice, left, hard and fast, toward the branch corridor, because the second man was the variable, and variables needed to be resolved. He went low around the corner, and the second man was exactly where he'd calculated. 3 feet in, already turning, and Ethan had his weapon hand controlled before the turn completed, and put the man against the wall with a forearm across his throat and his own weapon reversed against his ribs. "Tell your partner," Ethan said. The man said something in Czech, short. From the main corridor, the first man said something back, and the tone was different now, not calm, recalculating. Ethan didn't speak Czech, but he spoke the language of men reassessing odds, and what he heard was 2 professionals deciding whether this contract was worth dying for. Most contracts weren't. He took the man's weapon, stepped back, and came back into the main corridor with a gun in each hand, and the geometry of the situation now substantially altered. The man at the 30-foot mark was mid-40s, built like someone who had been large when young and had kept most of it. He was looking at Ethan with the expression of a professional who has had his problem escalate past the authorized scope. "Walk away," Ethan said. "Tell whoever hired you that the asset is under Moretti protection as of tonight. If your employer wants to have a conversation about that, they know how to reach me through proper channels." The man looked at him, then past him, at Amelia. "She's not worth what he's offering," Amelia said from behind Ethan. Her voice was entirely steady. "Whatever the number is, he will not pay it. He never does." Something moved in the man's face, a confirmation of something. He stepped back. Then he turned and walked toward the far end of the corridor, where a third door, one Ethan hadn't clocked, opened and let in a slice of cold night air, and then closed. Ethan stood in the corridor for 3 seconds, both weapons up, counting. Then he lowered them. He turned around. Amelia was looking at him. In the bad fluorescent light, her face was doing something complicated, processing something, sorting it into the categories she used to keep herself operational. He watched her pull it back together, the way he'd watched her pull correspondence back together after he'd thrown a file at the wall during a bad negotiation. Methodical, piece by piece, until the surface was smooth again. "You knew he'd leave," Ethan said. "I knew the contract language. They were hired to retrieve, not to engage Moretti infrastructure. Killing you would have cost more than they were authorized to spend." "How do you know what they were authorized?" She met his eyes. "Because I've been reading threat assessments on myself for 3 years from your intelligence files." A pause. "You had an analyst tracking a missing persons flag on an international financial network. Low priority. I've been keeping it low priority." He stared at her. "From inside your own system," he said. "Yes." "For 3 years." "Yes." The sound above them had changed. Less sporadic firing, more controlled movement, which meant the fight was concluding, one way or another. His phone buzzed. Marco. "Upstairs is clear. 2 of theirs down, 4 contained. Our side, Reyes has a shoulder, nothing else. Perimeter? Holding. Estate is locked. Local response ETA 8 minutes. Will be clear before they arrive. Bring the car to the service road north side, 4 minutes." He hung up. He looked at Amelia. "We're moving." They moved. The car was a black SUV with tinted glass and Caruso in the front passenger seat with a medical kit he'd already opened. Amelia sat in the rear, Ethan beside her, and for 3 minutes nobody spoke while Marco drove and the estate lights disappeared behind them, and Chicago's nighttime geography replaced the Hendricks estate's manicured darkness with the city's harder, more honest dark. Caruso turned in his seat and looked at Amelia with the focused efficiency of a man who had been patching up Moretti family members for 11 years. "You hit?" "No." Adrenaline crash coming. You'll shake. I'm aware. Caruso looked at Ethan. Ethan shook his head once. He was fine. Caruso turned back around and began restowing the kit. Ethan looked out the window. The city moved past. He was aware of Amelia beside him, not touching, 2 inches of seat between them, and aware of the last hour in a way he hadn't been aware of the last 3 years, which was information he was not ready to fully process. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere they can't reach you tonight." He paused. "The Moretti safe house on Archer. It's clean. Nobody outside the immediate family knows the address." "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we have a conversation." He turned and looked at her directly for the first time since the corridor. A full one. Everything. The financial network, the access codes, who's been hunting you and for how long. I need the complete picture. She held his gaze. "Why?" "Because I can't protect something I don't understand." "You said you were already committed." "I am. That's why I need to understand it." He kept his voice even. "I don't make commitments blind. I made one tonight on instinct, and I'm not taking it back. But I'm also not running it blind." She looked at him for a long moment, the look of a person running a calculation that had more variables than the visible ones. Then she nodded. One nod, clean and final. "Everything," she said. "Everything," he confirmed. She turned and looked out her window. After a moment she said quietly, almost to the glass, "Reyes, the man with the shoulder wound, he'll be all right?" "He's been shot before," Caruso said from the front without turning. "He'll complain about it for 6 months. He's fine." A pause. "I'm sorry for what happened tonight." The car was quiet for a moment. "Not your fault," Ethan said. "They came for me. They came to my grandmother's event, on my territory." His voice had gone to a place she hadn't heard in 3 years of working beside him. Something colder and more final than anger. Something that had moved past the emotional register entirely. "That's not something I set aside. Sus." The safe house on Archer Street looked like nothing from the outside. A narrow 2-story building pressed between a laundromat and an insurance office in a neighborhood that had been gentrifying in slow motion for 20 years and hadn't quite got there yet. Inside it was different. Clean, spare, functional. Weapons staged in 3 locations. A communications setup in the back room. A kitchen with a week's worth of non-perishables. 2 bedrooms with doors that locked from the inside. Caruso checked the perimeter. Marco drove a second circuit around the block. Ethan walked through every room in the order he always walked through them before he considered a space secure, touching nothing, just reading the air, the way his father had taught him to do in every new location. His father had taught him a great many things that had proven useful and a smaller number of things that had proven catastrophic, but that particular habit had kept him alive, so. Amelia was in the kitchen when he came back down. She'd found the electric kettle and was making tea with the focused attention of someone who needed something simple to do with their hands. Her silver gown was impractical for a safe house, and she stood in it anyway because there was nothing else. And the combination, ballroom dress, industrial kitchen, the particular hour that was past midnight but not yet toward morning, had a quality that Ethan filed away without analyzing. He sat down at the kitchen table. He set both weapons on the table, cleared them, set them to the side. He pressed his palms flat on the tabletop. "Tell me about your father," he said. She poured the tea. She set a cup in front of him. He hadn't asked for one. She'd made it anyway. And for a moment he thought about how many cups of coffee had appeared on his desk in the last 3 years, and how he'd never once thought about the mechanism. And she sat down across from him. "My father was brilliant," she said. "The kind of brilliant that only works in specific climates. He built something extraordinary, and he trusted the wrong people, and it destroyed everything he'd spent his life on." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "He died 8 months after the night he sent me away. I couldn't go to the service. I watched it on a news feed from a rental room in Milwaukee." Ethan said nothing. "The men who destroyed his network have spent 6 years consolidating what they took. But there were pieces they couldn't access. Infrastructure he'd built behind walls they didn't have the keys to." She looked at the table. "I have those keys. I always have. She stopped. "I never wanted to use them. Using them means becoming visible. It means becoming the thing they're looking for. But they've been looking anyway. For 3 years, yes. More aggressively in the last 6 months. Something changed. She looked up. I think one of the organizations got a credible lead on my location. Not my exact address, but the city. A pause. Chicago. Ethan's jaw tightened. Leon Vega. She shook her head slowly. Not Leon. Leon wouldn't... She stopped, started again. Leon knew my father. We were close years ago, before everything collapsed. He never knew about the financial network. My father kept that completely separate from his personal relationships. She looked at her tea. Seeing him tonight was... I didn't expect that. He looked for you. He said so. Do you trust him? A long pause. The kettle ticked as it cooled. Outside, somewhere on Archer Street, a car alarm started and died. I don't trust anyone, she said. I've been living that way for 3 years, and it's kept me alive. That's not an answer. She looked at him. No, she said. I don't know if I trust him. I trusted him once, and then the world ended and I ran. And I don't know what he is now, or who he answers to, or whether the person I knew is still inside the person I saw tonight. She set her cup down. Satisfied? No, Ethan said. But it's honest. She looked at him with something that might have been surprise, quickly recovered. The back door opened and Marco leaned in. Perimeter's clean, Caruso's at the front. You want rotation or are we stationary for the night? Stationary. 6-hour rest cycle, you take first watch, he paused. Get Bellini on the phone first. I want to know everything we have on the crew from tonight. The checks, who hired them, what organization's running the contract. Marco nodded and disappeared. Ethan looked back at Amelia. She was watching him with the particular focused attention she'd used to watch him work for 3 years, reading him, cataloging, building the same kind of file in her head that she built on paper. He'd never noticed her doing it before. He noticed it now. What? He said. You're different, she said. Outside the office. Everyone's different outside their context. You're more... She seemed to search for the word. Present. In the office, you're always somewhere else, managing the next thing, the thing after that. Tonight you've been... She stopped. Here. He looked at her. Something moved through him that he wasn't going to name at midnight in a safe house kitchen with weapons on the table and the taste of cordite still faint in the air. Get some sleep, he said. We'll talk more in the morning. She stood. She picked up her cup, rinsed it at the sink with the same precise economy of movement she brought to everything, set it in the rack. She turned. Ethan, she said. He looked up. Thank you. For the corridor. She paused. For all of it. He nodded. She went upstairs. He sat at the table with his hands flat on the surface and listened to the city outside and did not sleep for a very long time. Morning came gray and cold, the way Chicago mornings did in late autumn, pressing against the safe house windows like something that wanted in. Ethan was at the communications station in the back room when Bellini's report came through at 6:47, and the report was not what he'd expected. He read it twice. Then he sat for a moment with the report on the screen and something shifting in his chest that he identified after a moment as the specific sensation of a playing field changing shape. The crew from the gala, the Czechs, the men in the corridor, they were contracted out through a shell entity that Bellini's team had traced in 4 hours to a parent organization based out of Geneva, which was not surprising. What was surprising was the secondary connection, the authorization layer above the shell, the name on that layer. He was still looking at the screen when he heard her on the stairs. She came into the back room in the clothes Marco had sourced before dawn, dark jeans, a gray sweater, flat shoes, and with her hair pulled back and the silver gown gone, she looked like herself again, or at least like the version of herself he'd known, except that he understood now that version had never been herself at all. It had been a careful construction, a costume that happened to also be functional. She looked at the screen. She couldn't read it from where she stood, but she could read his face, apparently, because her own face went still. "What is it?" she asked. He turned the screen toward her. She read it. He watched the blood leave her face. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in a slow withdrawal, like a tide going out, leaving everything behind it sharper and more exposed. "That's not possible," she said. "Bellini's clean. If that name is on this authorization layer, it's real. That name—" She stopped. Her voice was doing something it hadn't done in the corridor with guns at both ends. It was fraying. "That's my father's name. That's the foundation entity my father built before everything. It's supposed to be dormant. It's been dormant for 6 years. It's not dormant." She looked at the screen. He could see her processing it. The way she processed everything, rapid and methodical. But this time the methodology was running into something it couldn't organize, something that didn't fit. "Someone reactivated it," she said slowly. "Someone with access to my father's organizational infrastructure. Someone who had that access 6 years ago and has been waiting," Ethan said. "Or someone who got access more recently. There are only 3 people who had that access." She looked at him. "One of them is dead. One of them is me." She stopped. "And the third?" Ethan asked. She sat down. Not the controlled, precise sit she always used. She sat the way a person sits when their legs make the decision before their mind does. "The third," she said, "is the person who told my father which of his lieutenants to trust." Her voice was very quiet. "The person who helped him build the network in the first place." She looked at the screen. "The person he trusted more than anyone." "Who?" Ethan said. She looked at him. And in her face, beneath the 3 years of careful invisibility, beneath everything she'd built to survive, was the face of a 23-year-old who had been put on a plane by a father who loved her and had never had the chance to explain everything. The face of someone who had spent 6 years running from an enemy and was only now understanding that the enemy had been running the same direction. "His lawyer," she said. "His fixer. His most trusted—" She stopped. Her jaw worked. "He has an American practice. He operates out of 3 cities. Ethan went very still. "Name," he said. She said it. The name landed in the room, and Ethan felt it land the way you feel a structural problem reveal itself, not with noise, but with a shift in everything you thought was holding weight, because he knew the name. He knew the name because the man had been on his guest list for 2 years, had attended 3 Moretti family events, had been proposed, twice, by Ethan's own advisory board as a potential legal partner for the Moretti Group's offshore restructuring project, had been in that ballroom last night. Ethan stood up. He moved to the window and looked out at the gray morning street and put both hands against the wall and breathed through it. The specific discipline of not letting what you feel become what you do until you're ready for it to become what you do. Behind him, Amelia's voice. "You know him." "He's been inside my orbit for 2 years. I almost brought him into the organization." Silence. "He positioned himself," she said. She said it the way she said everything she'd figured out. Flat, fast, without effect, because the affect would come later when she could afford it. "He found you. He's been using proximity to you to track me, to get close to the network my father left." "And the gala," Ethan said. "Last night. He knows I work for you. He's known for maybe months, maybe longer." She paused. "He sent the crew last night to take me before you understood what you had." "Before I understood what I had," Ethan repeated. A beat. "What I mean is, I know what you mean." He turned. He looked at her across the small room, the report still glowing on the screen between them. "He miscalculated. He thought you were invisible to me, that grabbing you from that gala would be clean." His voice had gone to that cold place again. "He's going to find out how badly he miscalculated." She held his gaze. Something moved in her eyes. Not quite fear, not quite hope. Something cracked open between the two. "He won't stop," she said. "He's been working toward this for 6 years. Whatever's in those accounts, whatever my father built and hid, it's everything to him. He will not stop because you drew a line." "No," Ethan said. "He won't stop because of a line." He picked up his phone. "He'll stop because I'm going to dismantle everything he's built piece by piece until there's nothing left to fund a search. And then I'm going to make sure every organization in this city understands that touching what's mine comes with a cost that no number in any account can cover. He pressed call. Marco picked up on the first ring. Get me Caruso, Bellini, and Reyes if his shoulder's functional. Conference in 30 minutes. He looked at Amelia. And get Nona on the phone. She's going to want to know what walked into her party last night. He hung up. Amelia was watching him with that look again, the one he'd cataloged and not analyzed for 3 years. Except now he understood it differently. It wasn't the look of an employee reading her employer. It was the look of someone who had spent 3 years deciding whether to trust the most dangerous man in a city full of dangerous men, and was only now, in a safe house kitchen at 7 in the morning, beginning to arrive at an answer. There's something else, she said. Something in her tone stopped him. Tell me. She looked at the screen. The entity, my father's foundation entity that was used to authorize the contract last night. She paused. The activation timestamp is 3 weeks ago. She looked up. 3 weeks ago, I filed a renewal on a security clearance document inside your system. A routine action. I used a subsidiary email address that I've kept active for 3 years as a failsafe. Her voice had gone very careful. Someone flagged that email address, traced it back. That's how they confirmed I was in Chicago. Someone inside my system, Ethan said. She held his gaze. Someone with access to Moretti Group internal correspondence. A beat. I'm not saying it's one of your people. I'm saying the information came from inside your organization, and it may have been accessed externally without anyone on your team knowing. Ethan processed this. Or, he said, it wasn't accessed externally. The sentence sat in the room. He thought about his advisory board, the 2 men who'd recommended the lawyer. He thought about who had access to the communications infrastructure. He thought about 2 years of proximity and how much a patient man could learn in 2 years inside the orbit of an organization before anyone thought to look at him as a problem. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. An unknown number. 1 message. We should have this conversation in person, Moretti. I think we want the same thing. The girl, the network, a resolution. Call me. And beneath it, a number he recognized. Not from his contacts. From the report on the screen. From Bellini's intelligence. From 2 years of a man making himself useful at the edges of Ethan's world. Patient and careful. Ethan stared at the message for 4 seconds. Not long. He was not a man who gave shock more time than it needed. 4 seconds to read it twice, confirm what he was reading, and file it into the correct category. Then he set the phone face down on the desk and looked at the wall. The lawyer's name was Conrad Hale. He said it in his head the way you press a bruise, to confirm it still hurts, to confirm it's real. Conrad Hale, 61 years old, silver-haired and soft-voiced, and possessed of the particular kind of stillness that Ethan had always read as wisdom and was now reading as something else entirely. Conrad Hale, who had attended the Moretti Foundation spring luncheon in March and spent 40 minutes discussing restoration architecture with Katerina. Conrad Hale, who had been recommended by 2 men on Ethan's advisory board as the most discreet international legal mind available for the kind of offshore restructuring the Moretti Group's expansion required. 2 men on his advisory board. Ethan picked his phone back up. Don't call back, Amelia said. She was watching him from across the room with the focused stillness of someone who has already run every scenario and arrived at the conclusion faster than the person still processing. I wasn't going to. He wants you on the phone so he can read you. Gauge what you know and what you think you know. She came toward the desk slowly. He's controlled this situation for 6 years. He's comfortable with patience. If you call him, you're on his timeline. I'm aware. He looked at her. You said 3 people had access to your father's foundation entity. You, your father, and Hale. He paused. Did your father know Hale was the leak? The question landed in her face like something physical. She absorbed it the way she absorbed hard things, with a brief tightening around the eyes, a small adjustment of the jaw, and then the surface went flat again. I don't know, she said. I've asked myself that for 6 years. She looked at the screen where Bellini's report still glowed. The night my father sent me away, he gave me the documentation, the account access, everything he'd prepared. He told me to trust no one. He told me the people who were coming for him were people he'd called family. She stopped. He didn't give me a name. He knew someone close to him was involved. He knew. She exhaled. He couldn't say it. I think he couldn't say it. A pause. Or he was protecting me from knowing, because knowing a name means carrying a target. Ethan thought about that. He thought about a man in the last hours before his organization collapsed around him, putting his daughter on a plane, preparing documentation in silence, building an exit she didn't know she needed. He thought about the specific quality of that kind of foresight, not optimism, nothing like it. The cold, grief-adjacent clarity of a man who has done the math and doesn't like the answer. He thought about his own father, briefly, and then didn't. Conrad Hale has been in my orbit for 2 years, he said. That means he's had 2 years of access to my organization's communication structure, my personnel files, He stopped. He looked at Amelia. Your email address, he said. The subsidiary one you used 3 weeks ago. It was filed inside a Moretti Group internal system. Yes. Hale had access to that system through the advisory board consultation process. His voice had gone quiet in a way that was more controlled than anything louder could have been. He didn't hack in from outside. He's been reading it from a seat at the table. The silence in the room had a specific texture. How much does he know? Ethan asked. About me? Enough. My location, my cover identity, probably my movements for the last several months. She paused. About the network, the accounts, the routing infrastructure my father built. He knows it exists. He spent 6 years trying to get the access codes. She held his gaze. He doesn't have them. That's the only reason I'm still useful to him rather than the alternative. He needs you alive. He needs me cooperative. Those are different things. Something moved in her eyes. He's a lawyer. He'll have a document, some kind of transfer authorization. He'll want me to sign it. And if you don't? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time it was Marco on the internal line. He answered. Conference is set. Caruso, Bellini, Reyes, back room, 5 minutes. A beat. Nana's on her way. Ethan pulled the phone from his ear. He looked at Amelia. You stay in this room during the conference. She blinked. I have information you need. I know. I'll come back to you after. He held her gaze. I need to talk to my people without you present for the first part. Not because I don't trust you. Then why? Because some of what I'm going to say to them about what needs to happen next, you shouldn't hear it. Not yet. He kept his voice even. I'm not managing you. I'm managing the order of information. She looked at him for a long moment with that measuring look that he was beginning to understand was her most honest expression. The face she used when she was deciding something real rather than processing something routine. Then she sat down. Fine, she said. He went to the conference. The back room held 4 people and a great deal of compressed tension. Caruso stood by the window. Bellini, who was small and dark, and ran Moretti Intelligence with the personality of a man who found chaos mildly disappointing, sat at the table with a laptop open. Reyes was against the wall with his left arm in a makeshift sling, looking like someone who was in more pain than he was acknowledging, and was annoyed at being in it. Marco stood by the door. Caterina Moretti was in the chair at the head of the table. She was wearing black, as always, and had clearly dressed with full intent before leaving her house, which meant she had not been particularly surprised by this morning's call, which meant she had already been processing last night as something more than a security incident. She looked at Ethan when he came in with the expression of a woman waiting for a full report. He gave it. He laid it out the way he laid out all operational briefs, sequentially, without editorializing, facts first and analysis after. The gala, the crew, the corridor, the safe house, Amelia's history, her father's network, Conrad Hale's name and his position, and how long he'd been inside their structure. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Reyes said, Hale? Just the name, flat. I've met Hale. He came to the Wicker Park meeting in September. I know. He sat across from me for 3 hours and talked about liability frameworks. Reyes's jaw moved. I bought him lunch. I know. Bellini was typing. The advisory board access he had. I'm pulling the system logs from the last 24 months. If he was reading internal correspondence, there will be a trace. He paused. Might take 6 hours. You have 4. Then I'll need coffee. He didn't look up. Katerina had said nothing. She was looking at Ethan the way she'd looked at him since he was 12 years old, which was the way a person looks at something they understand completely and are still not finished with. He waited. The girl, she said. Amelia. The girl, Katerina repeated, with the specific emphasis of someone who is not being dismissive but is choosing their precision carefully. What is she to you? The room got very still in the way rooms got still when Katerina Moretti asked a direct question and the answer had weight. She's under my protection, Ethan said. That's what she is as a function. I asked what she is to you. He held his grandmother's gaze. I'm not discussing that right now. I think you should, because the decision you made last night, standing in front of a professional retrieval team for a woman you've treated as office furniture for 3 years, that is not a security decision. And if it's a personal one, I need to understand what it's based on because personal decisions in our context carry costs. I'm aware of the costs. Are you? She tilted her head slightly. You've had 36 hours with this woman as a person rather than a function. You don't know what that's based on. Nona, I am not saying pull back the protection. I'm saying understand why you're extending it. Her voice was entirely calm. Because Conrad Hale is going to use whatever he can use, and if there's something there for him to use, he'll find it. She paused. So will others. Ethan looked at the wall for a moment. Then he looked back at her. Noted, he said. Good. She folded her hands on the table. Now, Conrad Hale has a message on that phone. He wants a meeting. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we don't meet on his terms under any circumstances. Then what? I'm thinking Hale doesn't know the extent of what we found last night. He knows the extraction failed. He doesn't know Bellini traced the authorization layer. He thinks he still has operational cover. He looked at Bellini. Is there any part of the trace that would have triggered an alert on his side? Not the way I ran it. I came in through a tertiary routing path. Bellini looked up briefly. He doesn't know what we have. Then we have a window. Ethan looked at the table. He's going to move. He failed last night and he's going to recalibrate and move again, and faster this time because he knows she's with me now, and every day she's with me is a day the window gets smaller. He paused. We use that urgency. We let him think he has more cover than he does. We let him set something in motion. And then? Marco asked. And then we're waiting where he doesn't expect us to be. Katerina nodded once. Not approval, exactly. More like a coach watching a player make the right call and choosing not to say so out loud because saying so wasn't the point. The 2 board members who recommended Hale, she said. Fabrizio and Gould. I know. You'll need to have conversations with them, separately, today. I know. She stood. The meeting was over in her estimation, which meant it was over. She moved toward the door and then stopped with her hand on the frame and looked back at him. She handled herself well, Katerina said. Last night, at the table with Vivian Cole. A pause. And before that, when she spoke about the literacy initiative, she'd read the reports. She reads everything she prepares. Yes. His grandmother looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face in years, something that was not quite approval and not quite concern, but lived in the territory between them. She reminds me of your grandfather's secretary, 1987. That woman held this family together through 3 of the worst years of our history, and nobody ever knew her name. She paused. Don't make the same mistake your grandfather made. He noticed too late. She left. Ethan stood in the room for a moment after the door closed. Then he went back to Amelia. She was where he'd left her, but she'd moved the chair to face the window and was sitting with her arms crossed, not defensively, but the way you hold yourself when you're cold, and there's no external source of warmth to help with it. She turned when he came in. He sat across from her. He put Bellini's report on the table and added the screenshot of Hale's message beside it. "Here's where we are," he said. He told her the plan. She listened without interrupting, which was her way. She took information in completely before she processed it, never reacting in halves. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the table. "Hale will know it's a setup," she said. "He didn't get to 61 in this world by taking things at face value. He'll suspect. He'll run it anyway because he's running out of time and he knows it." Ethan paused. He's been patient for 6 years, but patience has an end. Whatever changed 3 weeks ago, whatever made him reactivate the entity and move on you, something shifted his timeline. He's not operating from a position of comfort anymore. She turned that over. "You think something happened in the network, some trigger event." She looked at the report. "If one of the accounts my father built had a dormancy expiration, a clause that would redirect assets after a set period without access, that could have fired recently." She paused. "I'd have to check the account architecture. I'd need—" She stopped. "I'd need to access the network to check." Ethan waited. "I've never accessed it," she said. "In 3 years, I've never touched it, because the moment I do, I generate a signal." She looked at him. "He'll see it." "He'll see it anyway when we want him to," Ethan said. "That's the leverage. You access the network, he gets the signal, he moves. We're ready." She looked at him steadily. "You want to use me as bait? I want to use the network as bait. You control the network. There's a difference. In practice," he held her gaze, "in practice you'll be in a controlled location with my full infrastructure around you, not walking into a room, not exposed." He paused. "I'm not offering you as a commodity. I'm offering Hale a signal that looks like an opportunity. He doesn't get the opportunity. He gets us." She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the gray light through the window shifted slightly as the cloud cover moved. "All right," she said. "Just like that?" "I've been running for 3 years." Her voice was flat, not defeated, final. The voice of someone who has made a decision they've been building toward without knowing it. "I'm tired of running. If there's a way to end it, I want to end it." She looked at him. "Even if it's messy." "It's going to be messy." "I know." She paused. "Ethan." He waited. "There's something else I need to tell you. Something I didn't tell you last night because—" She stopped. Her hands on the table were still, but barely. "Because I wasn't sure how it would—" Another stop. He'd never seen her struggle for words before. In 3 years, she had always known exactly what to say and precisely how to say it. Watching her lose that fluency now produced a specific discomfort in him that he recognized as concern and filed as something to think about later. "Tell me," he said. "Leon Vega," she said. "When he found me at the gala, he said he'd been looking for me." She looked at the table. "He has been. I know because I've seen references, fragments in intelligence traffic that crossed your desk. Reports about a West Coast organization making quiet inquiries about a missing person connected to the Carter financial network." She paused. "I assumed it was hostile. I flagged it as a low-level threat in my tracking and moved on. But Leon and I—" She stopped again. "We were close. Years ago. Before everything. His uncle and my father had an alliance, and Leon and I spent 2 years in the same circles before the collapse." Her voice had gone very careful. "I trusted him, past tense. I don't know what the present tense is." She looked up. "But I think you should know that if he reaches out, if he tries to contact either of us in the next few days, it may not be a threat." Ethan processed this. He kept his face neutral because that was what the situation called for, and he was aware of his grandmother's voice from 20 minutes ago sitting in the back of his skull like an uninvited commentary. He was also aware of something in his chest that was less analytical than everything else and more uncomfortable. "Understood," he said. "You're not going to say anything else about it?" "What would you like me to say?" She looked at him. He looked back. After a moment, she shook her head slightly, not dismissing it, setting it aside. The same way she set things aside in the office that weren't urgent and needed to be held for later. He almost said something then. He pulled it back. His phone rang. Not Marco's line. Not Bellini. The number was Fabrizio's, one of the two board members who'd recommended Hale. He answered. Fabrizio. The voice on the other end was wrong immediately. Too rapid, too thin. Ethan, I've been trying to reach you since last night. What happened at the gala? I need you to come in, Ethan said. Safe house on Archer. Immediately. I can't. I'm in the middle of... Fabrizio. He let the word land. Immediately. A pause. All right. The voice was worse. All right. An hour. He hung up. He looked at Amelia. She was watching him with her head slightly tilted, reading the phone call the way she read everything, accurately. He knows something, she said. He knows something, Ethan agreed. Fabrizio arrived in 53 minutes, which told Ethan he'd left immediately and driven fast. He was 64, thick-set, had been on the Moretti advisory board for 9 years, and was the kind of man Ethan had always read as reliably cautious. Not brilliant, not aggressive, but steady. The kind of man you put on a board to prevent errors rather than to generate ideas. He came into the safe house with the look of a man who hadn't slept, and when he sat down at the kitchen table, he pressed both palms flat against the surface like he needed the physical contact with something stable. Ethan sat across from him. Marco was in the doorway. Amelia had moved to the far wall without being asked, understanding instinctively how this needed to run. Ethan said nothing. He waited. That was always better than asking. Fabrizio looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He said, I need to tell you something about Conrad Hale. Go ahead. I recommended him. I know. I recommended him to the board and I vouched for him. He stopped. His jaw was tight. He asked me to, 2 years ago. He came to me privately. He said he had intelligence interests in the Moretti Group's restructuring process, and he needed an entry point, and he would make it worth my while. He looked up. His face was the face of a man who has been carrying something very heavy and is setting it down in front of someone who may not respond well. I told myself it was a straightforward advisory arrangement, that he was a legitimate operator with legitimate interests. He stopped again. He paid me. Over 2 years. I should have told you immediately. I should have... How much did he get? Ethan said. Fabrizio blinked. How much access? What did he pull from the internal system? Give me specifics. The man looked sick. Personnel files, communications logs going back 18 months at least, operational summaries for 3 ongoing projects. He paused. And a subsidiary email address. 4 weeks ago. He asked me specifically to flag anything from a subsidiary domain connected to an account registered in 2022. He closed his eyes. I flagged it. I didn't know why he wanted it. I told myself it didn't matter. The room was very quiet. Ethan sat with this. He sat with the specific, cold, dismantling sensation of understanding something he should have seen earlier. Not regret exactly, more like the recalibration that comes after a miscalculation. He looked at Fabrizio, and the man looked back at him with the expression of someone who understood perfectly well what his relationship to Ethan Moretti was about to become and had accepted it. You understand what you've done, Ethan said. Yes. You gave him the location, effectively. He kept his voice entirely even. The email flag led him to her location. He used that to authorize the crew last night. I didn't know, but that's not a defense. He stood. You're going to stay in this building until I tell you otherwise. You're going to write down every communication you had with Hale, every payment, every request, every piece of information you passed, full detail. Marco will provide what you need. He paused. If the document is complete and accurate, I'll decide what happens to you after this is over. If it isn't... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Fabrizio nodded. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. Ethan walked out of the kitchen. He stood in the narrow hallway and breathed through it. The anger, which was real and extensive, and the secondary thing underneath the anger, which was the feeling of his own organization having been used as a mechanism against someone he'd committed to protect, which was more personal than the anger and therefore more dangerous. Amelia appeared from the far room. She'd heard enough. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be sorry. You didn't do this. He did it because of me, because of what I carry." She stopped. "Every person near me becomes a liability. That's what I've been—" Her voice caught slightly on something. "That's what I've been trying to prevent for 3 years." He turned and looked at her. "Stop. I should have been more careful with the email. Stop," he said again, harder. "This isn't yours. Hale made choices. Fabrizio made choices. You survived, which is what you were supposed to do." He held her gaze. "Don't take on their failures." She looked at him. The look was complicated and very direct and very tired. "You're different from what I thought you were," she said. "I need you to know I understand that might be a problem for both of us." He almost said something again. He pulled it back again for the same reason as before, because the timing was wrong and the situation wasn't resolved, and until it was resolved, nothing personal could be given the floor it would need. "Bellini," he said. His voice had gone operational. "Tell me you have something." Bellini appeared from the back room with a laptop and the expression of a man who had found something he would have preferred not to find. "System logs," he said. He turned the screen. Hale accessed internal Moretti group communications through the advisory portal 27 times in 2 years. Standard access? Nobody flagged it because it was authorized. He paused. "But there's a second access pattern, parallel, running through a ghost port on the same system." He pointed at the screen. "This one wasn't authorized. This one wasn't Hale." Ethan looked at the logs. "Different user profile," Bellini said. "Different operational pattern. Whoever this is, they're not sloppy. They've been cleaning behind themselves. I almost missed it." He paused. "But not quite." "Who?" Ethan said. Bellini looked at him. The expression of a man who wishes the answer were different. "The access point traces to a device registered to the Moretti Group executive infrastructure." He paused. "Specifically to the executive assistant clearance level." The sentence took a moment to land. When it landed, Ethan went very still. He turned and looked at Amelia. She was already looking at the screen. Her face had done something he hadn't seen it do before. Gone, not pale, not still, but through something. Like watching someone fall in slow motion with nothing underneath them. "That's my clearance level," she said. "Yes," Bellini said. He didn't look at her when he said it. "The logs show access to communications about the gala's security protocols, guest list, venue layout." He paused. 3 weeks ago." The room was very quiet. "Someone used my credentials," she said. Her voice was entirely steady and entirely wrong. "Someone had your credentials," Bellini said. "The access was clean, knew exactly where to go. Took less than 8 minutes." Ethan looked at the screen. He looked at the timestamp. He thought about Hale's message from this morning. "We should have this conversation in person." And the specific confidence of a man who does not feel cornered. He thought about a ghost port running parallel to authorized access for 2 years. He thought about Fabrizio flagging an email address 4 weeks ago, and the crew arriving at the gala 12 hours after. He thought about Leon Vega walking into the Hendricks estate that had not been on the guest list. He picked up his phone and called Marco. "Pull the gala surveillance. Every camera we have access to. I want to know who Vega spoke to before he found Amelia in the ballroom." He paused. "And I want to know how he got on the estate." He hung up and looked at Amelia. Her face was doing something very controlled and very fragile at the same time. The face of someone running a calculation whose answer keeps coming out wrong. "Leon wouldn't," she started. "You told me you don't know what he is now," Ethan said. His voice was not unkind. "An hour ago. Your exact words." She looked at the screen. She looked at the timestamp. She looked at the access pattern that used her credentials to pull security protocols for an event she hadn't known she'd be attending until 6 days before it happened. 6 days. "I got the vendor card access confirmation 6 days ago," she said slowly. "For the gown, from your account." She looked at Ethan. "Hale knew I'd be at the gala because I accessed your vendor account from my workstation to pull the card details." She stopped. And someone accessed the gala's security files using my credentials 3 days later. She closed her eyes. 3 days later. Which means they knew you'd be there before you arrived, Ethan said. Which means someone was watching my access patterns in real time. She opened her eyes. They were very clear and very hard. Someone with access to your system who saw me pull the vendor card and understood what it meant. Hail, Ethan said. Hail or... She stopped. Marco came in through the back door at speed, which was unusual for Marco. Gala footage, he said. He pulled up a frame on his phone. Vega came in through the East Service entrance. Not the main gate. East Service. Same entrance the extraction crew used. He turned the phone. And here, 20 minutes before the shooting started, Vega in conversation with a man near the bar. He expanded the frame. I ran the face. He turned the phone toward Ethan. The man near the bar was not one of the crew. He was not one of the guests. He was a man Ethan had seen exactly once, 8 months ago, in a brief and unremarkable introduction at a Moretti Group legal consultation. Conrad Hale's assistant. Ethan looked at the photo for a long time. He looked at Vega's face in the frame, the composed, carefully neutral expression of a man in conversation rather than the face of a shocked man who had just seen someone he'd spent 3 years looking for across a ballroom. That face, the shocked face, the reopened wound that had come 10 minutes later, after the conversation with Hale's assistant, after he'd already been in the building for 20 minutes. Amelia was looking at the phone over his shoulder. He could feel the moment she understood, not from sound or movement, but from the specific quality of stillness that comes over a person when a piece of information hits the load-bearing wall of something they believed. He knew I was there, she said. He knew before he walked in. Her voice was very quiet. He didn't come because he saw me. He came because someone told him I'd be there. Hale's man, Ethan said, or... She stopped. She made a very small sound that was not quite a word. Then she said, or Leon told Hale's man himself. The kitchen was completely silent. She turned away from the phone. She walked to the window and stood with her back to the room and her arms crossed, and Ethan watched the line of her shoulders and the particular way she was holding herself, so not collapsing, nothing like it, but containing something very large in a space that wasn't built for it. He gave her 20 seconds. Amelia, he said. She turned. Her face was functional, operational. The face she used in the office, the face she used to survive. Whatever had happened to the person underneath it in the last 30 seconds was filed and locked, and would come out somewhere else at some other time. If Leon was working with Hale, she said, then everything I told you last night, everything about the network, the accounts, the access, he was in the building when I told you most of it. Her voice was careful and precise and completely empty of the thing it had been full of 20 minutes ago. In the corridor, he was behind that door, not the checks. Leon was in that corridor and She stopped. I gave him every piece of information Hale needed to build a complete picture of what I carry. Ethan looked at her. He used me, she said. Not bitterly, flatly, the way you say a fact about weather. He's been looking for me for 3 years, and it wasn't... She stopped. It wasn't what I thought it was. It was never what I thought it was. Ethan crossed the room. He stopped in front of her. He wanted to say something that would meet what was happening in her face, but there was nothing that would, and he knew it, so instead he said the only thing that was true and immediately useful. Then we change everything. Every piece of the plan he heard, every element that assumed he was neutral. He held her gaze. We build something he doesn't know about, and we use what he told Hale against both of them. She looked at him. The operational face held, underneath it, barely visible, something that was not defeat but lived right next to it. I need an hour, she said, to think through the account architecture. If I'm going to access the network, I need to understand exactly what signal it sends and who receives it first. She paused. I need to be certain that when I open the door, I know who walks through it. You have the hour, he said. She nodded and moved toward the back room, and he watched her go. The precise, contained walk, the silver gown replaced by ordinary clothes that somehow made her look more exposed rather than less. and he stood in the kitchen with the city outside the window and the weight of the last 18 hours settling into him properly for the first time. His phone buzzed. Not a call. A message. Unknown number, different from the one Hale had used. She trusted me once. She can again. Let me help you. L. Ethan stared at the message. He thought about Leon Vega's face in the ballroom, the performance of shock, the perfectly calibrated grief. He thought about the East Service entrance. He thought about Hale's assistant at the bar, 20 minutes before the shooting started, and what that conversation had decided. He thought about Amelia's voice saying he used me in the flat tone of someone updating a file rather than expressing feeling, because the feeling was too large to express in a kitchen in front of a man she'd known for 3 years and was only now beginning to know. He deleted the message. Then he called Bellini. I need you to build me a clean room, he said. Isolated system, no connection to any Moretti Group infrastructure. Nothing Hale's touched, nothing Fabrizio's had access to, nothing that runs through any hardware that's been inside this organization for the last 2 years. That's going to take, you have 3 hours. A pause. Coffee, Bellini said, and a better chair. Done. He hung up. He stood for a moment. The morning light through the safe house windows was still gray, still cold, still pressing against the glass with the particular Chicago insistence of a city that did not apologize for its weather. He walked to the back room door and knocked once. I need to know something, he said through the door. The account architecture your father built, the access codes, are they memorized or are they stored? A pause. Then her voice, level and careful. Memorized. All of it. He made me memorize everything the night he sent me away. Account numbers, routing sequences, passphrase layers. 6 hours in a hotel room in Milwaukee while I was still in the clothes I'd left in. Another pause. I've never written any of it down. So there's no document, no physical record anywhere. No. Which means Hale has been hunting you for 6 years for something that lives only in your head. The pause this time was longer. Yes, she said. Ethan put his hand against the door frame. He stood there for a moment with the information settling into place. The final piece of it, the piece that explained everything. 6 years of patient, meticulous pursuit. 3 years of positioning himself inside Ethan's organization. The gala, the crew, the corridor, Leon Vega's performance, and Fabrizio's slow betrayal, and the ghost port running quietly in the background of a system Ethan had thought was clean. All of it. All of it for something that existed only in the memory of a 29-year-old woman sitting in a room 10 feet away from him, which meant the only way Hale ever got what he wanted was if she gave it to him. And the only way to guarantee she never gave it to him was to make certain Hale never had the leverage to ask. Ethan pushed off the doorframe. He walked back to the communications station and began to work. And the cold morning pressed against the glass. And somewhere in the city, Conrad Hale was sitting with a phone in his hand waiting for a call that was not. The call Hale was waiting for never came. Instead, at 11:47 that morning, Conrad Hale's offshore shell entity, the one Bellini had traced through the Geneva routing layer, the one carrying the Moretti Foundation's founding year in its authorization code, received a signal. Account access. Richard Yun Carter's financial network. First contact in 6 years. Bellini had built the clean room in 2 hours and 40 minutes, which was 17 minutes faster than he'd estimated, and involved 3 cups of coffee and language that Marco, standing in the doorway, chose not to comment on. The isolated system sat on hardware that had never touched Moretti Group infrastructure, sourced in cash from an electronics supplier on the west side that didn't ask questions. And it was from this system that Amelia, at 11:43, reached into the architecture her father had built and opened one door. One door only. A secondary routing node. Enough to generate a signal. Not enough to expose anything real. She sat back from the keyboard and looked at Ethan. It's out, she said. How long before he sees it? The alert structure my father built would push to any registered monitor within 4 minutes. She paused. If Hale has been watching the network, and he has, for years, he'll have a monitor registered. 4 minutes, Ethan said. Give or take. He looked at Marco. Tell Caruso. Full deployment. Every asset we have in the city on standby. I want the Wacker Drive property locked down, the Michigan Avenue building on secondary access only, and I want 2 units mobile within 3 blocks of this location." He paused. "And get Reyes functional. I don't care about the shoulder." Marco was already moving. Ethan looked at Amelia. She was still looking at the screen, not at the access log, at the wall behind it, at something that wasn't in the room. "He's going to move fast," she said. "Good. I mean very fast. He's been waiting 6 years. When this signal hits his monitor, he won't strategize. He'll react." She turned. "He'll make mistakes. That's what we need." She nodded. She was pale and steady in the way that a structure is steady under load, not relaxed, bearing weight. She had been like this for 3 hours since the conversation through the door, since the moment the Leon Vega piece had landed and she'd filed it and locked it and chosen function over collapse. He'd watched her do it. He had not in 3 years watched anyone manage a psychological wound with that kind of cold discipline, and he was aware it was a skill she'd developed out of necessity rather than strength, which made it more impressive and more painful to observe simultaneously. He didn't say any of this. This was not the moment. His phone rang. Bellini. "He bit," Bellini said. There was something in his voice that was not quite satisfaction, but was in the vicinity of it. Signal hit a monitor registered to a shell company in Luxembourg, same parent structure as the Geneva entity. "He's got an alert system that just fired." A pause. "And he made a call. 17 seconds after the alert. I've got the outgoing number." "Who?" "Vega." The name sat in the room for a moment. Ethan looked at Amelia. She was looking at him. Her expression said she'd heard it and had filed it in the same place as everything else from the last 3 hours, and was not going to let it become something that compromised her in the next 6 hours. "Where's Vega now?" Ethan said. "Hotel Crestmore, River North. Checked in last night." "Hale?" "His office on LaSalle. He hasn't left since this morning." A pause. "He will now." Ethan checked his watch. 11:52. "How long to mobilize from LaSalle to this location?" 15 minutes in midday traffic, maybe 12 if he's running urgent." "He won't come here," Amelia said. "He doesn't know where here is." "He doesn't need to know where you are yet," Ethan said. "He just needs to know the network activated. He'll move to secure his own position first, consolidate whatever leverage he has before he comes for you." He thought. "He'll contact Vega directly, in person. He needs to confirm what Vega has, and coordinate the next move." "So we follow Hale to Vega," she said. "We follow Hale to Vega, and we take both of them in the same room." She was quiet for a moment. "That's not a conversation. That's an ambush." "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "I want to be there." "No." "Ethan, no." His voice was final, but not unkind. "You're not walking into a room with Conrad Hale. Not until it's over and the room is clean." She held his gaze for a long moment, the particular measuring look, but with something harder behind it now, something that had been compressed by 3 hours of filing things away and locking them down until the pressure had somewhere to go. "He's going to want proof of life," she said. "When Vega tells him what he heard in the corridor, the account architecture, the routing sequences, Hale is going to want confirmation that the signal came from me, that I'm actually accessing the network and not someone running a decoy." She paused. "He'll want to hear my voice." Ethan said nothing. "Let me be useful," she said, "in a controlled way. I can give you a window, a minute, maybe 2, where he thinks he's getting what he wants, where he's not thinking about exits." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking to be in the room. I'm asking to be on a line." He looked at her. He thought about his grandmother's voice from this morning. "Understand why you're extending the protection, because personal decisions carry costs." And he thought about the fact that the most dangerous thing he could do right now was let the personal thing make the operational decision, and also the fact that she was right. Hale would want confirmation, and a voice on a line was the safest version of giving it to him. "Controlled location," he said. "You don't speak until I tell you. If anything goes wrong, you go silent immediately, no matter what you hear." "Agreed." "And after," he said, "when this is done, you and I are having a different conversation." She looked at him. Something in her face shifted, not softening exactly, but opening slightly, the way a door opens when the pressure on the other side equalizes. "All right," she said. They moved at 12:22. Bellini had eyes on Hale through a contact in the LaSalle building's security infrastructure. A man who had owed the Moretti family a favor for 4 years and was settling it now. Hale left his office at 12:19 with one man, his assistant, the same face from the gala footage, and took a car north toward River North, toward the Hotel Crestmore. Ethan was in the lead vehicle with Marco and Caruso. Reyes was in a second vehicle with 2 men from the Wicker Park unit, his left arm in the sling, his right hand fully operational, which he had demonstrated by field stripping and reassembling a weapon in 40 seconds in the safe house kitchen, while Caruso watched with the expression of a man who had given up arguing about medical advice. Amelia was in a third vehicle, 3 blocks behind with Bellini, and 2 men whose job was to ensure she stayed 3 blocks behind regardless of what she heard on the line. Ethan had the earpiece in. Bellini had the open line ready. The city moved past the windows. Midday Chicago. All traffic and cold light, and the lake somewhere to the east pressing its particular gray authority against the skyline. "He's parking," Bellini said in his ear. "Crestmore service entrance, same as Vega used last night for the gala." "Of course," Marco said quietly, not to anyone. The Crestmore was 17 floors of limestone and glass on Huron Street, the kind of hotel that had been expensive for so long it had stopped needing to advertise it. Ethan knew the building. He knew most buildings in this section of the city, the way you know geography you've operated in for 20 years. Service entrance on the north side, freight elevator to the upper floors, a corridor on the 12th floor that connected the 2 tower sections and was not visible from the lobby security cameras. He'd used that corridor twice before for conversations that needed privacy. He was betting Vega had used it last night. "Room?" he said. 1214, Bellini said. "Registered under a corporate name, but the credit card traces back to a Vega family holding entity." A pause. Hale's man just scanned the service entrance keypad. Someone gave him the code. So it was coordinated. The meeting was already arranged. They weren't improvising. This was the second phase of a plan that had started before the gala, possibly days before. And Hale's people and Vega's people had been running parallel tracks that were now converging in room 1214, which meant there would be more than 2 people in that room. "Adjust," Ethan said to Marco. "Already counting," Marco said. "I've got visual on 2 Vega men in the lobby, positioned. They're not guests." "How many in the room?" "Unknown. At least 4 total if you count Hale and his man in Vega, plus 1 security." Marco paused. "Could be more." Ethan did the math. He had himself, Caruso, Reyes in the second vehicle, 4 additional men staged in the Crestmore's parking structure who had arrived 20 minutes earlier in a maintenance vehicle that the hotel's facility manager, another long-term Moretti relationship, had authorized without documentation. 6 of his people inside the building's perimeter, 2 of Vega's in the lobby, unknown number in the room. The math was acceptable. Not comfortable. Acceptable. He got out of the car. The freight elevator smelled of cleaning solvent and old metal and moved with the deliberate slowness of machinery that has been reliable for 30 years and knows it. Ethan stood in it with Marco and Caruso and listened to his own heartbeat and was aware of it the way he was always aware of it in the 10 seconds before something started, steady and slightly elevated, working with him rather than against him, the body's acknowledgement that it understood what was coming. The 12th floor corridor was empty. Institutional carpet, wall sconces, the particular quiet of a hotel during the middle of a weekday when the business travelers are in meetings and the leisure guests are elsewhere. Room 1214 was at the far end, past an ice machine that hummed in the corner, past a housekeeping cart that had been abandoned mid-service and sat outside 1210 with its door still open. Ethan stopped. He looked at the housekeeping cart and then at Caruso. Caruso looked at the cart and then at the open door of 1210 and nodded slightly. Vega's people had cleared the floor. Anyone who should have been in this corridor had been moved, so they knew something was possible. Maybe not this specifically, maybe just the general caution of men who had been operating in contested territory for days and had learned to control their immediate environment. But they'd thought about it. They're ready for something, Marco said very quietly. So are we, Ethan said. He pressed the earpiece. Bellini. Here. Put her on the line. Tell her 2 minutes. A pause. Then Amelia's voice, clear and level. I'm here. 2 minutes, he said. When I give you the word, say exactly what we discussed, nothing else. Understood. He looked at Marco. Marco and Caruso moved to either side of the corridor, not at the door yet, flanking it, covering the angles. Ethan walked to 1214 and knocked twice. Normal pace, not urgent, not tentative. A pause. Then the door opened and the man in the frame was not Conrad Hale and not Leon Vega, but a third man, late 30s, built wide, with a specific flat expression of professional security that had been briefed to expect someone other than what was standing in front of it. The man's hand moved. Ethan moved faster. Inside the door, before the hand completed its arc, the security man's wrist controlled and turned. The door pushed fully open. Marco and Caruso threw it behind him before anyone in the room had fully processed what was happening. The room had 4 people in it. Hale by the window, his assistant near the desk, Vega on the couch, and a second security on the far wall who made a decision when he saw Caruso and immediately revised it when he saw what Caruso was holding. Nobody fired. The math had been communicated in about 1 second, the way these things always communicate themselves in enclosed spaces when the geometry resolves unfavorably. Ethan stood in the center of the room and let the silence settle. Hale looked at him. He looked like his professional reputation, silver-haired, well-cut, with the relaxed physical posture of a man who had spent 60 years learning to appear at ease in difficult rooms. His face, in this moment, was doing something careful and controlled, and behind the careful control was something that was reassessing with significant speed. Vega was on the couch with both hands visible, because he was smart enough to understand that visible hands were the only currency worth spending in the next 30 seconds. He looked at Ethan, and his face was complicated. Not guilty exactly. The face of a man who had made a series of decisions that had seemed individually defensible and was now confronting their sum. Moretti, Hale said. His voice was exactly as Ethan remembered it. Soft, unhurried, the voice of a man who had spent a career being the calmest person in any room and had learned to use that as a kind of armor. This is... Don't, Ethan said. Hale stopped. We're past the part where you explain, Ethan said. I have Bellini's logs. I have Fabrizio's confession. He's been writing for 2 hours, very detailed. He seems to find it cathartic. I have the Geneva entity trace, the ghost port access, the gala crew authorization, all of it. He paused. The only variable in this room is how the next 10 minutes go. Hale looked at him. He was recalculating. Ethan could see it happening. The rapid, methodical resorting of a man who had controlled this situation for 6 years and was measuring the new shape of it, looking for the angle that still worked. She's alive, Hale said. Yes. And she's accessed the network. Yes. Then we're in a position to discuss. No, Ethan said. You're in a position to listen. The soft, unhurried quality in Hale's face went away. What replaced it was older and harder, and had always been there underneath. The thing that had run Richard Carter's organization into the ground and spent 6 years hunting his daughter with the patient precision of a man who believed his claim was legitimate and his timeline merely inconvenient. She owes me that network, Hale said. His voice was still controlled, but something in it had changed register. You don't understand what I built with her father. You don't understand what was taken from me when those accounts went dark. He paused. I funded half of that infrastructure. I structured the legal architecture for all of it. When his operation was destroyed, my investment went with it. His jaw tightened. She's carrying billions that belong, in part, to me. She's carrying her father's work, Ethan said, and you helped destroy the man who built it. Don't tell me what it is. He kept his voice even. The 3 lieutenants who coordinated the betrayal 6 years ago. You gave them the structural map. You gave them the timing. You knew exactly what was going to happen to Richard Carter's inner circle, and you prepared your position in advance. He paused. That's what 6 years of Bellini's digging gets you, Hale. Eventually, the architecture tells the story. The room was very quiet. Vega was looking at the floor. Leon, Ethan said. Vega looked up. What did he offer you? A long pause. Vega's jaw worked. He looked, in this moment, like someone significantly younger than the composed man who had walked into the Hendricks Estate ballroom the previous evening. Someone stripped of the performance of composure and left with whatever was underneath it, which was more complicated and less presentable. He knew where she was, Vega said. He'd known for months. He came to me with it. He stopped. He said if I helped him confirm her access to the network, gave him confirmation that she'd talked, that the codes were real, he'd give me her location and walk away. He looked at the window. He said she'd be safe, that he only needed the account authorization, that once he had that, he'd kill her, Ethan said, because she's the only witness to what he did to her father's organization, because the only way he ever has a clean claim to that network is if the person who can contradict him isn't available to do so. Vega said nothing. You knew that, Ethan said, a pause that lasted just long enough to be its own answer. I told myself it wasn't... Vega stopped. His hand moved to his face, pressed against his mouth briefly, came back down. I looked for her for 3 years, he said. I told myself if I found her, I could protect her, that I could be the one in the room when it happened and make sure... That's not protection, Ethan said. That's a story you told yourself. Vega looked at him. His eyes were hard with something that was not anger at Ethan, but was something older and self-directed and would probably take years to work out if he had years. Ethan turned back to Hale. Here's what happens now, he said. The network access signal that you received this morning, the one that told you the accounts were live, I need you to understand what that actually was. He pressed the earpiece. Bellini. Ready, Bellini said. Play the trace. Through the room's Bluetooth speaker, Marco had connected silently in the first 30 seconds. Bellini's voice came, a technical readout of the access signal, clean and precise. The routing path, the node that had been opened, the specific architecture of what had fired. Hale listened. His face stayed controlled for about 45 seconds, and then something changed in it, very slightly, the way a crack appears in a surface before the surface understands it's cracking. That's a secondary node, he said slowly. Yes, that's not the main access. That's a decoy layer. He looked at Ethan. His voice had gone very quiet. She didn't open the network. She opened a door in front of the network. Her father built it that way, Ethan said. A signal layer that fires when someone enters the outer architecture, designed to look like main access, designed to make anyone watching believe they found the entry point. He paused. Richard Carter was very thorough. He anticipated being watched. Hale was absolutely still. The access codes, Ethan said, the routing sequences, the passphrase layers, she has them. She's always had them. He looked at the man directly. You will never have them. Not through a document, not through coercion, not through 6 more years of hunting. Because the moment anyone attempts to compel her, the moment anything happens to her, there is a dead man's mechanism built into the account architecture that will reroute everything in that network to a list of charitable foundations that her father selected 20 years ago. He let that sit. She told me this morning. She also told me she'd be happy to confirm it. He pressed the earpiece. Amelia. Her voice came through clearly in the room's quiet, and whatever she felt about the men in this room, about Hale and about Vega, and about everything that had been done and said and betrayed over 6 years, none of it was in her voice. Her voice was clean and level and utterly final. My father built a fail-safe, she said. It fires on biometric confirmation of my death, or on a manual trigger I can activate from any connected device. The destination list is irrevocable. Mr. Hale, you've spent 6 years and considerable resources pursuing something that will disappear the moment you succeed in taking it from me. A pause. That was the point. That was always the point. The silence in the room had a different quality now. The quality of a structure after its load-bearing element has been removed, still standing, briefly, by momentum. Hale looked at the window for a long time. His assistant near the desk had gone very still. The security man on the far wall was doing the math that security men do, which is always the most honest math in any room. Hale turned back to Ethan. The softness was completely gone now. What was left was 61 years old and tired and had been playing a losing hand for 6 years without understanding it was losing. "What do you want?" he said. "A full accounting," Ethan said. "Everything from 6 years ago. The names of the 3 lieutenants you coordinated with, how it was structured, who authorized what, the financial trail." He paused. "And everything from the last 2 years inside my organization. Every access, every contact, every piece of information you extracted. And in return, the conversation about what happens to you happens at a table instead of somewhere else." He kept his voice even. "That's the offer. It's the only offer. You have until I finish the next sentence to decide." Hale looked at him. "Decide," Ethan said. Hale looked at the window again. He looked at Vega on the couch. And whatever passed between them in that look was the remainder of an arrangement that had just structurally failed, acknowledging itself. "All right," Hale said. Ethan nodded to Caruso. Caruso moved to Hale's assistant and had his phone and his credentials in under 10 seconds, professional and unhurried. The security man on the far wall was already looking at a spot on the floor and trying to remain peripheral, which Ethan noted and decided to allow for now. He turned to Vega. Vega was looking at him. Not with hostility, with something more complicated, the look of a man who knew he had no ground to stand on and was standing on it anyway because there was nowhere else. "She trusted you," Ethan said. "I know. You heard her in that corridor, everything she'd been carrying, everything she'd been protecting for 3 years. He kept his voice flat. "And you relayed it." "Not everything," Vega said. He said it quickly, then stopped. "I didn't give him the access structure. The technical specifics, I told him she'd talked, that the codes were real, but not the architecture. Not how it was built." He paused. "I don't know if that matters." "It doesn't," Ethan said. "It's detail. The principle is the same." Vega looked at him. "What happens to me?" "That depends on her." He said it without emphasis, without cruelty, just fact. "When this is over, she decides what she wants done about you. I'm not going to make that call." Something moved through Vega's face. He nodded. He looked at his hands. Ethan stepped into the corridor and pulled the door mostly closed behind him. He stood in the quiet hotel hallway with the ice machine humming in the corner and the housekeeping cart still abandoned 3 rooms down, and he breathed through the controlled deceleration that came after a confrontation resolved. Not relief, never relief. More like the physical sensation of pressure redistributing after a point of force is removed. He pressed the earpiece. "Bellini." "Here." "She's still in the vehicle?" "Yes." "She heard it all." "How is she?" A pause that was not Bellini's usual speed, which told him something. She's all right. She's quiet." Ethan stood for a moment. He thought about what quiet meant for her, which he was only now understanding was the most loaded word in her vocabulary. Not peace, not emptiness, but the sound of someone bearing something in the only way they knew how. "Tell her it's done," he said. "The room is controlled. Hale is contained." "And Vega?" "Contained." He paused. "Tell her I'll come to her when the building is secured." He went back inside. The next 40 minutes were operational. Bellini's team arrived to begin the documentation process with Hale. Marco coordinated the building's security to contain the situation without involving the hotel's management beyond the facility contact, who was already read in. Caruso managed the physical logistics of moving Hale and his assistant to a location that was not a hotel room in River North, with civilian guests 3 walls away. Vega stayed in the room. He stayed on the couch. He didn't attempt anything. He sat with his hands between his knees and the expression of a man replaying a sequence in his head and finding, each time through, the same wrong turn in the same place. Ethan watched him from across the room, and thought about what Amelia had said. He used me, in the flat, factual tone she used to survive. He thought about what it cost her to use that tone. He thought about the specific courage of a person who converts grief into information to keep moving. His phone rang. Reyes, from downstairs. "Building is clean," Reyes said. "Vega's 2 men from the lobby are in the parking structure. Cooperative." A pause. "Your grandmother called." "I'll call her back. She said, and I'm quoting directly here, 'Tell him the girl is still at the safe house and she's fine. She made herself coffee and she's been very calm,' which is the most concerning thing I've ever said about anyone." Ethan paused. "Katerina is at the safe house. She arrived 40 minutes ago, with food." Another pause. "She seems to feel the situation warranted personal supervision." He stood for a moment with the phone in his hand and the weight of the last 20 hours settling into him in a way that was different from how it had been settling before. Heavier in some ways, lighter in others, the particular redistribution that happens when a crisis moves from acute to resolvable. He looked at Vega. "She'll want to know why," he said. Vega looked up. "When she's ready to ask you, she'll want to understand why you made the choices you made." He paused. "I'd think about that answer." Vega held his gaze. "Does she know?" "She's known since this morning." Vega closed his eyes. He kept them closed for a moment that was private in the way that some moments are even in occupied rooms. A man inside something that nobody standing outside could follow. Then he opened them. "Tell her," he started. He stopped. "No, I'll tell her myself, if she'll hear it." "That's her decision," Ethan said. He moved to the window. The city outside was doing what it always did. Moving, indifferent, the perpetual Chicago machine of traffic and wind and ambition running on its own momentum regardless of what happened in any particular hotel room on any particular Wednesday afternoon. He'd always found that comforting rather than alienating. The city didn't register catastrophe. You had to register it yourself and then keep moving. His phone buzzed. A text from Bellini. "Hale is talking a lot. Lawyer instinct. Once he starts, he can't stop. You're going to want to hear this directly. Come to the staging location when you can." And then, from a different number, from the line Bellini had set up for Amelia. "Is it really over?" He typed back. "The hard part." "Yes." A pause. Then, "Your grandmother is here. She brought soup." He almost smiled. He didn't, quite, because the room still had Vega in it, and the day was not yet finished, and there was still a significant amount of work between this moment and any version of resolution. But almost. He pocketed the phone. He looked at Marco. "Let's hear what Hale has to say," he said. What Hale had to say took 90 minutes and covered 6 years, and multiple countries and 3 dead men whose names Ethan had never heard before, and 4 whose names he had. It covered the specific mechanics of the betrayal that had destroyed Richard Carter's organization. Who was coordinated when, who was paid how, which lieutenant turned first and who followed. It covered how Hale had positioned himself in the aftermath, absorbing pieces of the legal infrastructure while the violence was still ongoing, making himself necessary to multiple competing organizations in the chaos of the aftermath. And it covered, in technical detail that Bellini recorded and would later spend 3 days analyzing, the Ghostport access to Moretti Group systems, what had been read, when, for what purpose, and how it had been used. Ethan sat across from Hale for the full 90 minutes and let him talk. He asked 4 questions. He interrupted 0 times. He had learned a very long time ago that the most useful thing you can do when someone is confessing is provide the conditions in which confession becomes the path of least resistance and then stay out of the way. When it was done, Hale sat back in the chair and looked like a man who had been carrying something for 6 years and had just set it down without knowing, when he picked it up, how heavy it was going to be. "The federal contact," Ethan said. Hale looked at him. "You're going to need one, before this documentation goes elsewhere." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Because this isn't staying inside my organization. It's too big for that. The 3 lieutenants you named, 2 of them are operating currently, with active federal interest. That tape is worth something to people who can give you something in return." He paused. "I have a contact. He's clean and he's motivated. You work with him, you cooperate fully, and whatever happens to you happens in a courtroom with a lawyer present instead of in a parking structure. Hale looked at him for a long moment. You do that, he said. Bring in federal. I do that to end this in a way that protects her permanently, Ethan said. A federal record of Conrad Hale's full cooperation, naming every party involved in the Carter Syndicate destruction. That's documentation that lives forever. That makes moving against her structurally pointless for every organization that was watching that network. He held Hale's gaze. It also means you're untouchable for retaliation from the parties you just named, which should matter to you. Hale was quiet. Think about it, Ethan said. You have tonight. He stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He was tired, not the sharp, functional tired of the last 18 hours, but the deeper, settling tired that comes when the adrenaline has burned through and the body presents its bill. His shoulder ached from an angle he'd taken going through the hotel room door. His throat was dry. He thought about Amelia at the safe house with his grandmother and a bowl of soup, and he thought about the specific kind of quiet that Bellini had heard in her voice, and he thought about everything that was going to need to be said when there was enough space to say it. His phone buzzed one more time. Not Bellini, not Marco, not Amelia. An unknown number, different from all the others. A message that was 3 words and an attachment. A photograph of what appeared to be a document. The 3 words. She has a sister. Ethan stared at the screen. He opened the photograph. The document was in 3 languages, English, French, and what appeared to be Korean, and bore a corporate letterhead. The document in the photograph was dated 14 months ago. Ethan read it twice in the staging room with Hale 6 feet away and Bellini looking over his shoulder and the specific cold of an October afternoon pressing through the building's inadequate insulation. The document was a corporate filing, a beneficial ownership declaration for an entity registered in Luxembourg, the same parent structure as the Geneva Shell, the same constellation that had funded the Gala crew and built the Ghost Port and run Conrad Hale's 6-year operation. The name on the beneficial ownership line was not Hale. It was not Vega. It was a name Ethan didn't recognize, which meant it was either genuinely new or deeply buried, and the filing was 14 months old, which meant it had been in existence before Hale made his move on Amelia, which meant Hale was not the top of this structure. He looked at Hale. Hale was reading the message over Ethan's shoulder without attempting to hide that he was reading it, which told Ethan something about how Hale was calculating the next 10 minutes. He was past the point of strategic concealment. He was in the territory of a man who had decided cooperation was the only currency he had left and was spending it. Sujin Carter, Hale said. His voice was very quiet. Ethan looked at him. That's the name on that document, Hale said. I know because I'm the one who found her, 14 months ago. He paused. I'm the one who told her about her sister. The room went entirely still. Bellini stopped typing. Ethan stood with the phone in his hand and the photograph on the screen and the name in his head and thought about a 23-year-old woman put on a plane by a father who had prepared documentation and accounts and a fail-safe mechanism and everything except, apparently, the one piece of information about her own family that would have changed everything. She didn't know, Ethan said. No, Hale said. Richard Carter had another child, from a relationship that predated his marriage. A Korean woman he'd been involved with in the early years of building the network. She died young, complications from surgery, nothing sinister. The child was raised by the mother's family in Seoul, kept entirely separate from Richard's life. He paused. From both lives, the legitimate one and the other one. He looked at the phone. Sujin is 26. She came to me 14 months ago because she'd found paperwork in her grandmother's belongings after the grandmother died. Letters from her father. She didn't know what they meant, but she knew her father's name and she knew he was dead and she was trying to understand who she was. And you told her about the network, Ethan said. I told her about her sister. Hale's voice was careful in a way that was different from the careful voice of the first part of the evening. Less performative, more honest. The voice of a man trying to be precise about something he's ashamed of. Then I told her about the network. Then I explained to her what her sister was carrying and why it was relevant to both of them. He stopped. I told her she had a claim. that the accounts belonged as much to her as to Amelia. He looked at the window. I told her things designed to make her useful to me, and she was young and alone and had just found out she had a father who'd been dead for 6 years and a sister she'd never met, and she was easy to use. That's the truth of it. Ethan put the phone in his pocket. He looked at Hale for a long moment, at the 61 years of it, at the silver hair and the soft voice and the architecture of a man who had spent a career being the smartest person in the room and had built, from that intelligence, something that had required a 23-year-old to spend 3 years under a lamp in an office in Chicago hiding from the consequences. He thought about what to say. He didn't find anything worth saying. Where is she? He said. Chicago, Hale said. She's been here for 3 weeks. I brought her here because I needed her as a secondary leverage point. If Amelia wouldn't cooperate, a sister might be able to reach her differently. He stopped. She doesn't know what I intended to use her for. Where in Chicago? Hale gave an address. Wicker Park, a short-term rental, 2nd floor. He gave it without hesitation, with the specific forward momentum of a man who has decided to be completely useful because it is the only thing that might matter now. Ethan was already moving. He called Amelia from the car. He had thought about waiting, about getting to the safe house first, about finding the right way to frame it, about the 10 different ways this information could land on a person who had spent 3 years carrying a burden she believed was hers alone. He had thought about all of that for approximately 45 seconds in the elevator and then called her because she deserved to know before he drove to a Wicker Park apartment to knock on the door of a woman she'd never met and whose existence was going to reframe everything she thought she knew about her father. She answered on the second ring. There's something I need to tell you, he said, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. A pause. All right, he told her. He laid it out in the same sequential, uneditorialized way he laid out every operational brief. The document, the name, what Hale had said, what it meant. He kept his voice level because level was what the situation called for, and because she needed information delivered cleanly rather than softened into something that was easier to receive but harder to process. When he finished, there was silence on the line. Not the silence of someone who needed time, the silence of someone who already knew where they were going. Sujin, she said finally. Yes. Another pause. I want to go with you. I know. She doesn't know me. She doesn't know anything about me except what Hale told her, which was designed. She stopped. If you walk in there without me, the first thing she understands about her sister is a man she doesn't know arriving to deliver information. I don't want that to be the first thing. He thought about it for 3 seconds. Thought about a 26-year-old woman in a Wicker Park apartment who had come to Chicago looking for something she could name, family, identity, answers, and had been given instead a role in an operation she didn't understand. I'll come to you first, he said. We go together. Thank you. He heard her exhale just once, very brief. And then the line was professional again, both of them back in the operational register because the personal register was still something they were navigating toward and hadn't fully arrived at. Ethan, she said. Yes. He knew about her, my father. He must have known she existed. Her voice was very careful. He didn't tell me. He was protecting her the same way he was protecting you, Ethan said. The less you knew about each other, the less either of you could be used against the other. I know. She paused. I know that's the logic. It's still... She stopped. Yeah, he said. He didn't say anything else, and neither did she, and the line stayed open for a moment with both of them in it, and that was enough. Katerina Moretti was in the safe house kitchen when Ethan arrived, seated at the table with a cup of tea and the expression of a woman who had assessed the situation completely and was waiting for the rest of the participants to catch up. Amelia was standing by the window with her arms crossed, not the defensive cross, the cold cross, the one she used when she was managing something internal. And she turned when Ethan came in and he saw in her face everything she had sorted and held and filed in the last 2 hours, and the one thing she hadn't been able to file, which was sitting very clearly in the set of her jaw. He stopped in front of her. She looked at him. She said nothing for a moment. Then, I'm ready. We don't have to do this tonight, he said. We do. She said it without drama. Because if I wait, I'm going to build her into something she isn't, and then I'm going to walk into that room with a person I've invented and disappoint us both. She paused. I've had 3 years of imagining what my life would look like when it stopped being about survival. I've built 100 versions of it. None of them had a sister in them. Something moved in her face. Brief, honest, not covered. I don't want to build one now and get it wrong. Katerina made a small sound from the kitchen. Not a word. More like the sound of a woman who has heard something she recognizes. Ethan looked at Amelia. All right, he said. Let's go. The apartment in Wicker Park was on the second floor of a 3-flat on Evergreen Street, the kind of building that had been working class for 50 years before the neighborhood changed around it, and it became expensive without changing its bones. The hallway smelled of old wood and someone's cooking from the floor above, something with garlic, something warm, and the second floor landing had a single overhead light that flickered once when they reached it and then held. Ethan knocked. A pause. The sound of someone moving inside, the particular careful quality of movement in an unfamiliar space. Then the door opened. Sujin Carter was 26 and looked like someone who had been assembled from 2 different inheritances and had spent her life figuring out which parts belonged where. She was slight, with dark eyes that were wide-set and very still, and she wore her hair cut short and had the specific physical quality of someone who was comfortable taking up very little space, which Ethan recognized because he had watched the same quality in her sister for 3 years without understanding what it was. She looked at Ethan, then she looked at Amelia, and whatever she had been told to expect, whatever Hale had prepared her for, whatever version of this moment she had constructed in 3 weeks of a Wicker Park apartment, none of it had included this. He could see it in her face, the disassembly of a prepared scenario and the raw encounter with the actual thing. Amelia looked at her. A long moment. The flickering hallway light held. Below them, the building settled in its old bones, and somewhere above them, the garlic and warmth continued. Hi, Amelia said. It was the most ordinary word Ethan had ever heard her use. Sujin's mouth opened slightly. She said in a voice that was very young and very Korean accented and very careful, You look like him. Amelia's jaw tightened, just barely. I know, I'm told I have his eyes. I have his hands, Sujin said. She looked at her own hands briefly, and then back up. My grandmother told me. I didn't know what she meant until I saw his photograph. Then I understood. Another silence. Not uncomfortable, exactly. More like a space that neither of them was in a hurry to fill, because filling it meant moving forward, and forward was irreversible. Can we come in? Amelia said. They came in. The apartment was sparse, a temporary residence assembled from the minimum required to make a space livable. A suitcase partially unpacked near the bedroom door, a laptop on the kitchen table with 3 browser tabs open that Ethan clocked quickly before looking away, an English-Korean translation tool, a Chicago street map, a genealogy research site, a single photograph taped to the wall beside the kitchen window. A middle-aged woman Ethan didn't recognize, unsmiling, dignified, taken in what looked like a formal living room. The grandmother, probably. They sat at the kitchen table. Ethan took the chair against the wall and stayed quiet and let the room belong to the 2 women across from each other. He had done this before, sat in rooms where something large and irreversible was being processed, and his job was simply to be present without filling the space. He was good at it. He was less good at it tonight for reasons he acknowledged internally and set aside. Amelia put both hands flat on the table. What did he tell you? She said. Haley, what did he actually tell you? Sujin looked at the table. He told me about my father's organization, what it was, what happened to it. She paused. He told me there were financial accounts, a network my father had built, and that the access was held by his surviving daughter. She looked up. He told me that you were that daughter, and that the accounts belonged to both of us, that we each had half a claim. She paused again. He said you would resist sharing access, that you'd been hiding for years and had become isolated, untrusting, a beat. He said I might be able to reach you where he couldn't. Because you're family, Amelia said. Yes. And you believed him. Sujin looked at her directly. I believed the part about you existing, she said. I believed the part about my father. I had the letters from my grandmother. They confirmed the dates, the names. She paused. The rest of it, the accounts, the claim. I didn't know what to believe. I came because... She stopped. Her hands moved on the table, a small, uncertain gesture. I came because I had just buried my grandmother and I had no one left, and I had letters that said I had a father who was dead and a sister who was alive, and I just needed to see if it was real. The kitchen was very quiet. Amelia looked at her for a long time. He watched Amelia's face during that look, the methodical, precise process that was usually about information but was doing something different right now, something he didn't have clean language for. Not assessment, something closer to recognition. Conrad Hale was using you, Amelia said. He wasn't going to give you anything. The accounts, there is no shared claim. Our father never set one up. He didn't know Hale knew about you, and Hale intended... She stopped. She looked at the table. When she looked back up, her voice was very even. He intended to use your presence to leverage me, and once he had what he wanted, you would have been a liability. Sujin absorbed this. She absorbed it the way she seemed to absorb most things, quietly, completely, with a stillness that was probably genetic and had probably confused people around her for 26 years. I thought it might be something like that, she said. Amelia blinked. You knew. I didn't know. I suspected. Sujin looked at her hands. He was very prepared. Every time I asked a question, he had an answer that was exactly the right shape, like he'd thought about every possible thing I might ask. She paused. My grandmother used to say that a person who is always prepared is a person who is always managing something. She looked up. I came anyway because the part about you was real, the part about having a sister. She held Amelia's gaze. That part I needed to be true, even if everything else was a lie. Ethan watched Amelia's face. He watched it absorb something it hadn't been built to absorb. Not information, not threat assessment, not the operational processing of a difficult situation. Something softer and more disorienting than any of that, which was the simple, direct weight of being needed by someone who had no other reason to be there. Her jaw worked. Her hands on the table stayed still. I would have found you, Ans, she said. Her voice was very quiet. When it was over, when it was safe, I would have looked for you. She paused. I didn't know you existed until tonight, but I want you to know that I would have looked. Sujin looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, Okay. Just that. Okay. The most ordinary word in any language, used to mean something that neither of them could say in more complicated terms without losing the truth of it. Ethan looked at the photograph on the wall. The grandmother, unsmiling, dignified. He thought about a woman who had kept letters for 26 years, letters from a man who had loved someone he couldn't stay with, who had built an empire and lost it, who had put 2 daughters on 2 different planes and tried to protect them both with silence and preparation and the particular flawed love of a person who was better at infrastructure than presence. He thought about what it costs to love someone by designing their survival instead of staying in it with them. He thought about a specific lamp on in an empty office in the 38th floor of a black glass tower, about 3 years of coffee cups appearing without being requested, about a woman who had hidden so thoroughly that the person she hid beside had stopped seeing her, and who had chosen that invisibility deliberately because visible things got hurt. He was done not saying things. Shake. They left Sujin's apartment at 9:47 with a plan that was 3 days old within the next hour and would take 3 weeks to build properly. Bellini would verify her documentation, establish her legal identity independently of anything Hale had constructed, and ensure she had access to clean resources while the larger situation resolved. Marco would arrange accommodation within the Moretti network's secure housing structure, not the safe house, something more permanent and more comfortable, somewhere she wasn't a temporary resident. Sujin had agreed to all of it with the same quiet directness she brought to everything. She had also, at the door, looked at Amelia one more time and said, "You don't have to do anything about this, the sister part. Not yet." She paused. "I've waited 26 years. I can wait a little more." Amelia had looked at her for a long moment and said, "You won't have to." They stood on the sidewalk outside the Evergreen Street building in the October cold, the city making its indifferent noise around them. And Ethan looked at Amelia looking at the building's second-floor window where a light was still on. "You all right?" he said. She laughed. It was short and real and slightly cracked around the edges. The laugh of someone who has been managing the impossible for too long and has just been handed one more impossible thing that turned out to be a gift instead of a burden and hasn't fully resolved the difference yet. "No," she said. "I'm not all right." She looked at him. "But I think I'm going to be. Those are different things." "They are," he agreed. She looked at the window one more time. Then she looked at him, and the operational face was gone. Fully gone. For the first time he could remember, not filed or locked or in suspension. Just her face. The face of a 29-year-old woman who had spent 3 years surviving something and was standing on the other side of it, in the cold on a Wednesday night in Chicago, figuring out what came after. "You said," she started. She stopped. "In the safe house this morning, you said after this was over we'd have a different conversation." "I did. I want to have it." He looked at her. The city around them was doing what it always did. Noise, movement, indifference, and none of it was relevant. "Not on a sidewalk," he said. She almost smiled. "No, not on a sidewalk." "Tomorrow," he said, "when Hale's documentation is complete and the federal contact is made and Sujin is settled and Vega is—" "Vega," she said. The almost smile went away, but nothing hard replaced it, just the weight of a name that meant something complicated and unresolved. "He wants to talk to you," Ethan said. "When you're ready, not before." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not ready tonight." "I know. But I think—" She paused. "I think eventually I'll want to hear what he has to say. Not because I'm going to forgive it, because I want to understand it." She looked at the sidewalk. He was the first person who knew me after everything happened. The first person who was kind to me when I was 23 and running and didn't know what I was doing. She stopped. "Knowing he used that, I need to understand how someone gets from that to what he did. Not for him. For myself." "That makes sense," Ethan said. She looked at him. "Does it to you? Someone who operates the way you do, the way you've always operated. Does that kind of question make sense to you? Needing to understand a betrayal rather than just respond to it?" He thought about it honestly. He thought about his father, who was not a question he visited often, and about Fabrizio, who had been writing in a back room for 4 hours, and about the specific exhausting work of understanding something rather than simply acting on it. "It makes more sense to me tonight than it did yesterday," he said. She held his gaze. "Why?" "Because someone I've been not looking at for 3 years turned out to be the most interesting person in any room I've ever been in," he said. "And I've been in rooms worth looking at." He paused. "It makes you reconsider what else you haven't been paying attention to." The October cold moved between them. She didn't look away. "I've been paying attention to you," she said, "for 3 years. You knew that. I know it better now than I did then." "That's the most honest thing you've said to me," she said. "I'm catching up," he said. Chad. The federal contact's name was Dresner, and he arrived at the Moretti Group's Michigan Avenue building at 7 the following morning in a coat that needed pressing and with the expression of a man who had been expecting this call for longer than the call had existed. He'd been in the organized crime division for 11 years and had spent 4 of them aware of the perimeter of the Moretti organization without having cause or capacity to go inside it. And he sat across from Ethan in a conference room on the 38th floor and listened to the complete Hale documentation with the focused quiet of a man who understood exactly what he was being given and what it was going to cost everyone at the table. When Bellini finished the presentation, Dresner sat for a moment. "The Carter Syndicate destruction," he said. "That 6-year-old jurisdictional crossover across 4 countries. I know." The 3 lieutenants he named, 2 of them have been on federal watch lists under different flags for years. He looked at the documentation. This gives us direct structural connection, chain of authorization, financial trail, the whole architecture. He paused. This is significant. Yes, Ethan said. Dresner looked at him. And what does Moretti want in return? Hale's full cooperation is documented and confirmed as voluntary. Whatever happens to him happens in a courtroom with appropriate process. He paused. And the Carter family network, the financial infrastructure belonging to Richard Carter's estate, is formally recognized as the property of his surviving heirs, not seized, not absorbed into any federal asset recovery process. Clean title to his daughters. Dresner looked at the table. Daughters. He had 2. A pause. You've been thorough. I had good help, Ethan said. Dresner nodded slowly. I'll need to bring in my supervisor in the International Coordination Unit. This doesn't move in a day. I know. Take the time it needs to take. Do it right. Ethan paused. Hale gives you everything on record. The Carter syndicate destruction, the lieutenants, the financial mechanisms, all of it. In exchange, he gets process, not immunity. Process. You understand that? He understands it. Dresner closed the folder. He looked at the table and then at Ethan, with the particular expression of a federal investigator recalibrating a mental model he'd been running for years. This is not how I expected this building to enter my life, he said. No, Ethan said. It isn't. They shook hands. Dresner left with a copy drive that Bellini had prepared with the meticulous precision of a man who had spent 2 days making sure nothing on it could be questioned. Ethan stood at the window for a moment after the elevator doors closed. 38th floor. Michigan Avenue below in the morning light, Chicago doing its perpetual business, indifferent and relentless and entirely itself. He thought about the last 72 hours and the specific, irreversible way they had changed the shape of things. He thought about his grandmother saying he noticed too late. He turned and walked to his office. He sat at his desk. And for the first time in 3 years, he looked at the desk across the glass partition, the lamp, the clean surface, the chair, and the absence of it was something he felt physically, a kind of negative space that had always been full and was now registered as empty. He was aware that this was new information about himself. He was choosing to act on it. She was in the Moretti Group's secondary conference room on the 35th floor, at the table with Bellini and 2 attorneys from outside the organization's regular counsel. Fresh contacts, no Hale contamination, women who had been vetted in the last 48 hours with the urgency that the situation required. They were building the legal structure for the Carter estate recognition, the documentation that would establish Amelia and Sue Jin as sole heirs to Richard Carter's financial architecture, clean and permanent and beyond any future challenge. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she saw him. She was in a gray suit he recognized as one from the office. Not the silver gown, not the jeans and sweater from the safe house. Herself again, but differently. The same professional surface with something changed in the quality of it. Less invisible, less constructed to disappear. She was explaining something to Bellini with a pen in her hand, pointing at a document, and she moved with the precise, unencumbered energy of someone who has put down a weight they've been carrying so long they'd stopped noticing it. She looked up and saw him. She stopped talking. He said, "When you're done." She looked at the document, then at the attorneys, then back at him. "Give me 20 minutes." He waited in the hallway. He stood with his back against the wall and his hands in his jacket pockets, and looked at the ceiling, which was unremarkable, and thought about the next 20 minutes and the conversation that would happen after them. He was, he recognized, nervous. He had not been nervous in a professional context since he was 19 years old and had not been nervous in a personal one since considerably before that. He thought about what his grandmother had said on Saturday night at the Hendricks estate when Amelia had talked about the literacy initiative reports. "She reminds me of your grandfather's secretary. Don't make the same mistake." He thought about Caterina Moretti, who had survived everything she'd survived and never once made the mistake of pretending she didn't feel the things she felt, because she'd always known that the feeling was information and the information was the only thing worth trusting. He thought about being 19 years old and his father showing him a room full of men and saying every one of them is afraid of something, and the ones who don't know what they're afraid of are the most dangerous ones. He had spent 20 years making himself the least afraid person in any room. He was aware that this was not the same thing as not being afraid. The door opened. She came into the hallway and pulled the door partially closed behind her. She looked at him. He looked at her. The hallway was empty, corporate and fluorescent and ordinary in every possible way. "The federal meeting went well?" she said. "Yes." "Dressner's credible?" "Credible and motivated. He's been waiting for this case for years." He paused. "Hale's documentation gives him everything he needs. The 2 lieutenants he named are going to spend a significant amount of time in federal proceedings." He looked at her. "It's over, the operational part." She nodded. She looked at the wall. She was doing something internal. He could see it, the final filing, the last piece of the last 3 years being closed and set down. "My father," she said. She stopped. "He built the failsafe because he knew. He knew Hale was the leak. He had to have known, or at least suspected. He built a mechanism that would make the accounts worthless to anyone who hurt me, and then he sent me away with all the codes in my head and let me think I was protecting myself by staying hidden." She paused. "He was protecting me the whole time, from everything except the loneliness of it." Ethan said nothing. He understood that this wasn't a question and wasn't asking for analysis. "I used to be angry at him," she said, "for sending me away without explanation, for the years of not knowing what I was protecting or why or how long it was supposed to go on." She looked at the floor. "Now I just think he was a person doing his best under circumstances that had no good options. And his best was extraordinary in some ways and completely insufficient in others. And that's just—" She stopped. "That's just what people are." "Yes," Ethan said. She looked at him. The measuring look, but softer at the edges than he'd seen it before. Less analytical, more present. "You wanted to have a conversation." "I did." "Then have it," she said. He looked at her. In the fluorescent hallway light, in the corporate quiet of the 35th floor of a building where she'd worked for 3 years and hidden and survived and done extraordinary work in ordinary conditions, she was the same person she'd always been. That was the thing that kept coming back to him. She hadn't changed, he'd changed, or rather something in the way he was looking had changed, and the person who had always been there was now simply visible. "I've spent 3 years," he said, "being very good at not looking at things I didn't want to have to account for." "I know," she said. "You were one of them." "I know that too." She held his gaze. "It was safer that way. For me. If you didn't look, you couldn't see, and if you couldn't see, you couldn't be used," he said. "Yes." She paused. "That's not the whole truth of it. What's the rest?" She looked at the wall for a moment. Just a moment. Then, "The rest is that 3 years ago I walked into a job with the most dangerous man in Chicago and spent 6 months deciding whether to trust him. And then I decided, and I stayed, and every day I stayed I understood the difference between the man you perform for the world and the man who answers the phone when his grandmother calls and cancels a meeting about cement contracts." She looked back at him. "And I thought if you ever looked, if you ever actually looked, it would be something I couldn't manage, something I couldn't keep inside the right boxes." She paused. "I was right." He was quiet for a moment. "I looked on Saturday," he said, "on the stairs at the Hendricks estate. I know, I felt it. I should have looked 3 years ago." "You weren't ready 3 years ago," she said. "Neither was I." She held his gaze. "I'm telling you that honestly, not to make you feel better, because I think we should start from honesty and stay there." He took a step toward her. Not aggressive, deliberate. The way he moved through every space he occupied, with intention and without apology. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said. "I have been for the last 72 hours more than I have been with anyone in a very long time, and I'm not planning to stop." He paused. "That's not going to be easy to live beside. I'm not easy to live beside." "I've lived beside you for 3 years," she said, "at a professional distance." "Distance isn't the variable." She looked at him steadily. "I know what you are. I know what your family is. I've read every file that crosses your desk for 3 years, and I've sat in your building and I've understood exactly the nature of the world I was in. She paused. I chose to stay in it. Every year I chose to stay. That's not naivety. A beat. I'm not asking for a different life. I'm asking for this one, but actually present in it. He reached out and took her hand. Just that. Took her hand, the way he'd offered his arm at the Hendricks estate on Saturday evening in what had seemed like a formal necessity, and was, he now understood, the first honest thing he'd done in the interaction. She looked at his hand holding hers. She looked at him. Okay, she said. Just that. The same word her sister had used in a Wicker Park kitchen 3 hours ago, carrying more than any more complicated word could have held. 3 weeks later, the Moretti Foundation's October board meeting was held in the main conference room on the 40th floor, which had a view of the lake that could, on clear days, make you briefly forget the nature of what was discussed in it. Dresner's federal process had moved with unusual speed, which Ethan attributed to the quality of Hale's documentation and the motivated interest of an investigative unit that had been waiting years for a structural case in the territory Hale had operated in. The 2 lieutenants named in the Carter syndicate destruction were in federal custody as of the previous week. Hale was in a separate protective arrangement, cooperating fully with the prosecution team, his silver hair and soft voice now deployed in depositions rather than negotiations. His assistant had taken a reduced arrangement in exchange for technical corroboration. Conrad Hale had, in the end, been completely correct about one thing. He was very good at being the most useful person in a room. He had simply been wrong about which room it would ultimately matter in. Vega had left Chicago 10 days earlier. He had not left before requesting a meeting with Amelia, a request she had considered for 4 days and then agreed to, in a neutral location, with Ethan 3 rooms away and the door open. The meeting had lasted 40 minutes. Ethan had not been present, and she had not told him everything that was said in it, and he had not asked, because some things belonged to the people who had lived them and could not be borrowed. What she had told him was this, that Vega had not made excuses, that he had explained, not justified, explained, the specific loneliness and anger and grief of a man who had spent 3 years searching for someone he'd lost and had found her, and in the weakness of that finding had made the worst possible decision, that he had known while making it that it was wrong and had made it anyway, which was its own kind of honesty in retrospect. She had told Ethan she wasn't sure what she was going to do with that information over time. He had said that was reasonable, and that had been the whole conversation about it, and it had been enough. Sujin Carter had been in Chicago for 23 days and had begun, in the previous week, to exist in the city rather than merely inhabit it. She had a permanent address now, a small apartment in Lincoln Park that Bellini had sourced and Marco had vetted, and Caterina Moretti had inspected personally on a Tuesday morning, arriving unannounced with a bag of groceries and an opinion about the building's heating system, which she delivered directly to the property manager while Sujin watched with an expression of complete bewilderment. She and Amelia had dinner twice in those 3 weeks. At the first one, they talked carefully around the perimeter of things, feeling the shape of each other from a safe distance. At the second, they had argued, briefly and productively, about something inconsequential, the right way to order coffee in a Korean versus American context. And the argument had lasted 6 minutes and ended with both of them laughing at the same time, which was new information for both of them about the other. Amelia had called Ethan afterward and told him about the argument, and he had listened to her tell it and had understood from the way she told it, with the specific energy of someone reporting something that had surprised and pleased them, that she was going to be all right. Not healed, not finished, not without the years of carrying still somewhere in the architecture of her, but all right. On the night of the Foundation board meeting, after the formal session had concluded and the board members had left and the 40-floor conference room was empty, Amelia stood at the window that looked out at the lake. Ethan came and stood beside her. The lake was dark, and the lights of the city were on it in fragments, and the October wind was pressing against the glass in the particular way Chicago wind pressed against glass in autumn, with a kind of insistence that was neither threatening nor welcoming, just the city asserting its own nature. When I first took the job, she said, I used to stand at the window on the 38th floor during lunch and look at the lake. She paused. I told myself it was because I needed the perspective, the reminder that the city was larger than the problem. She looked at the water. I think what I actually needed was to remember that there was something that couldn't be tracked or triangulated or reached. She paused. Just open. He stood beside her and looked at the lake with her. There's a property, he said, on the North Shore. My grandfather built it in the 60s. It's been closed for 7 years. The last time we used it was a family event in 2017 that I'd rather not discuss. He paused. The water access is good. The structure is sound. It needs to be opened up. He looked at the lake. I thought maybe this winter. She looked at him. I'm not good at slow things, he said. I have spent my entire adult life treating slow things like problems to be resolved rather than states to be inhabited. He paused. I'm told this is a known issue. Who told you? My grandmother, multiple times. She almost smiled. She's right. I know. He turned from the window and looked at her directly. I'm saying that I want to try. The North Shore property, weekends when it's possible, slow things. He held her gaze. I'm not promising to be good at it. I'm promising to try. She looked at him for a long moment. The lake was behind her and the city lights were on it, and her face in that light was the face of someone who had survived 3 years of carrying the weight of a dead man's empire in her memory, who had worked in an office beside a man who didn't look at her, who had been hunted and hidden and had found in the same week both an enemy exposed and a sister she hadn't known to look for. I spent 3 years, she said, being invisible in a building full of people who would have used my existence as leverage if they'd seen me clearly. She paused. You're the first person in 3 years who looked and chose not to use what you found. She held his gaze. That matters to me more than the North Shore property. The North Shore property is an attempt to demonstrate it, he said. I know. She turned back to the window. Yes, she said, this winter. He stood beside her. The city ran its perpetual engine below them, and the lake held its dark patience at the city's eastern edge, and the October wind pressed against the glass and held there, neither threatening nor welcoming. He reached out, and she was already reaching back, and their hands found each other in the way that things find each other when they've been circling the same space for long enough. Not dramatic, not sudden, the quiet arrival of something that had been becoming true for longer than either of them had been willing to name. They stood at the window. The city ran below them. The lake ran east. The wind held. It was not an ending that erased what had preceded it. The corridor, the running, the 3 years of a lamp on in an empty office. The father who'd prepared everything except presents. The sister found in the rubble of a man's worst choices. The weight of every year it had cost. None of that was gone. It was all still in the architecture somewhere, load-bearing in ways they hadn't finished discovering. But they were standing in it together, and that was a different kind of thing entirely.